I remember the night like a scar that never healed. I was 25 years old, barely 3 years into the job, still trying to prove myself as a deputy. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the kind of night when the wind has a bite to it and the moon hides behind a thin veil of clouds. The air felt restless, like it was waiting for something. Dispatch called me around 11:40 p.m. The voice on the radio was calm, almost bored, but I could hear the static cutting in and out. She said, "Unit 12, got a call out by County Road 6. Reports of strange lights, maybe someone stuck out there." County Road 6 wasn't a place people went at night. It was a forgotten stretch of pavement cutting through farmland and thick woods, a two-lane that twisted for miles before it spat you out near the river. Locals said it was haunted, though that word never got passed around inside the sheriff's office. We called it the Dead Road. Deer accidents, abandoned cars, drunk drivers. Nothing good ever happened out there after dark. But I was young, and I wanted to show I could handle it. So I clicked the mic and said, "Copy that, I'll check it out." The drive out took me 15 minutes. My cruiser hummed steady on the asphalt, the headlights stretching into the dark, catching the glint of reflective signs and the ghostly eyes of raccoons darting across the road. The farms out there had long gone quiet. No porch lights, no engines, no people, just miles of black fields and the tree line pressing in close. As I turned onto County Road 6, the radio hissed once, then went silent. No music, no chatter, not even static. It was just me and the tires rolling over cracked pavement. I told myself it was nothing, just a bad patch of reception. Still, I felt a weight drop in my gut. I slowed down, scanning the tree line, the ditches. The call had said strange lights. That could mean anything, kids fooling around with fireworks or someone shining high beams off the road. But after a few minutes of nothing, I started to wonder if it had been a prank. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, a trick of my headlights bouncing off something metal in the trees. But as I eased up on the gas, I realized the glow had a life of its own. A pale, bluish light floated low in the ditch ahead. It wasn't steady like a flashlight. It flickered, stretched, and shimmered, as if it were made of fog and glass all at once. I slowed the cruiser to a crawl. My hand rested on the radio out of habit, but it was still dead silent. No static, no dispatch, nothing. The glow moved. It drifted higher, maybe 4 or 5 feet off the ground, and swayed as though pulled by a breeze I couldn't feel. My headlights washed over it, but instead of disappearing, the light seemed to pulse brighter, reacting somehow. I parked on the shoulder and killed the engine. The sudden quiet was crushing. No crickets, no rustle of wind, just the sound of my own breathing inside the car. For a long moment, I just sat there staring. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Gas leaking from the ground, someone with a lantern, maybe a reflection off water. But the ditch was bone dry, full of weeds and dirt. I finally grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air outside was cold enough to sting. Gravel crunched under my boots as I crossed to the edge of the ditch. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound firm. My voice came out thin, swallowed by the night. "Sheriff's office. Anybody out there?" No answer. Just the light swaying gently, now only 20 feet away. I started down into the ditch. The weeds brushed against my legs, brittle and sharp. Every step seemed too loud. My flashlight cut a yellow cone across the darkness, but it barely touched the glow. It was like the light didn't want to be touched by mine. When I got closer, the thing pulled back, slow at first, then quicker, drifting deeper into the trees. I should have stopped right there. I should have turned back to the car, reported what I saw, and left it alone. But something about it pulled at me. Not curiosity, not even duty. More like a thread tied around my chest, tugging me forward. So I followed. The ground sloped upward, and I pushed through brush until I found myself standing in a small clearing. The glow hovered at the center, flickering like a dying bulb. Around me, the trees formed a black wall. I shined my flashlight on it again, and for the briefest second, I thought I saw a figure inside the light. A person, tall, thin, arms hanging low at their sides. Their head tilted, watching me. The light pulsed once, and the shape was gone. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. My mouth was dry, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, broken, like someone speaking underwater. It came from everywhere at once, brushing against my ears and the back of my neck. I spun in a circle, flashlight slicing through the dark. But there was nothing there. The glow stretched suddenly, flickering faster, and I realized it was moving toward me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over roots, my flashlight jerking. The whispering grew louder, words tumbling over each other, but I couldn't make any of them out. I turned and bolted. Branches clawed at my jacket, tearing at my skin, but I didn't stop until I broke through the brush and scrambled up the ditch. My boots slipped in the dirt and I fell hard against the gravel shoulder. When I looked back, the clearing was empty. No light, no figure. Nothing but darkness pressing down heavy and endless. I staggered to the cruiser, threw the door open and slammed it shut behind me. My hands shook as I jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life and the headlights painted the empty road ahead. For a moment, I just sat there, trying to steady my breath. Then I grabbed the radio again, hoping maybe I'd get something this time. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Do you copy? Static. I tried again, louder. Dispatch, come in. Do you copy? The static hissed, then broke. A faint voice slipped through, too faint to be dispatch. A voice I didn't recognize. It whispered 3 words, stretched and broken by static, but clear enough to freeze my blood. Don't look back. I dropped the mic like it burned. My eyes went to the rearview mirror. Every fiber of me wanted to check, to see what might be behind me. But I didn't. I jammed the car into drive and hit the gas. The cruiser sped down County Road 6, the trees whipping by in the headlights, the black fields stretching out forever. My knuckles were white on the wheel. The radio went silent again. I didn't look back. Not once. And I never went down that road alone again. The next part of the story isn't easy for me to tell. It didn't happen all at once like a car crash or a gunfight. It unfolded slow, piece by piece, like watching a rope fray until the last strand snaps. And that's what still eats at me. The quiet way it happened. The silence that came after. It was only 2 nights after I saw that strange light on County Road 6. I told myself I'd imagined it. Or maybe I'd been overtired seeing things that weren't there. That's what you do when you wear a badge. You rationalize, you build walls in your head. Because once you admit something doesn't make sense, you open the door to panic. I kept my mouth shut about it. Didn't file a report, didn't tell the sheriff, just buried it. But the weight didn't go away. It sat heavy on me every time I clipped my badge on, every time I drove out past the empty fields. That night, though, it wasn't me who was sent out there, it was Deputy Cole. Cole was a couple years older than me, a big guy, built like a farmhand with a laugh that could fill a room. He'd been with the department about 6 years. People liked him because he didn't take himself too seriously. He was the kind of deputy who carried a pack of gum in his pocket and gave it out to kids whenever we did school visits. But that night, his voice didn't sound like Cole. I was finishing some paperwork at the station, around midnight when his call came over the radio. At first, it was just static. Then a low voice pushed through, muffled and broken. Dispatch, this is Unit 9. I'm on County 6. Checking out. Possible vehicle. The signal crackled so bad I had to lean close to make it out. The dispatcher repeated back, asking him to confirm. There was a long pause, just white noise hissing, before he came back again. Copy, I've got figures in the ditch. I remember the room going still. The other deputies froze, looking at each other. Figures? That wasn't how Cole talked. He'd say people or suspects, never figures. The dispatcher asked him to clarify. More static, a burst of garbled words. Then we all heard it, clear as day. They're not moving, just standing there. His voice shook. Not much, but enough. The kind of shake you notice when you know someone well. The sheriff grabbed the mic, tried to cut through. Cole, it's Sheriff Davis. What's your location? Silence. We waited. 10 seconds, 20. The static buzzed in and out. Then Cole's voice bled through again, but softer now, almost like he was whispering into the receiver. They know I can see them. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I whispered, "What the hell is he talking about?" Nobody answered. The dispatcher tried again, her voice shaking. Unit 9, do you require backup? For a moment, the radio was dead. Then a burst of sound ripped through, sharp and painful, like the mic had been pressed too close. Cole's breathing filled the channel. Ragged, fast, panicked. Then came the words, "I'll never forget. They're in the ditch. Too many. Don't come." And then the line went to pure static. We scrambled. The sheriff barked orders, sending 2 units out immediately. I begged to ride along, and he let me. My stomach was in knots, but I had to go. I had to see. The drive felt endless, the cruiser's lights flashing across empty fields. The whole time, the radio sat dead silent, like whatever connection we had to Cole had been cut clean. When we reached County Road 6, his cruiser was there. Parked on the shoulder, engines still running, headlights burning bright into the black ditch. The driver's door hung open, but Cole wasn't inside. I jumped out, heart pounding. The night air was sharp with the smell of exhaust. I called his name, shining my light down into the ditch. The weeds swayed, brittle and yellow, but nothing moved. No footprints I could see, no sign of anyone standing there. One of the deputies went to check the cruiser. He leaned in and turned back, his face pale. "Radio's dead." The sheriff ordered us to spread out. We moved along the road in both directions, sweeping the ditches with flashlights. I swear I saw something for a second, a shape between the trees, tall and still. But when I turned my light on it, the shape was gone. We searched for hours. Nothing, no trail, no struggle, no blood. It was as if Cole had stepped out of his cruiser and vanished into thin air. We called in more units, dogs, even volunteers. By sunrise, there were nearly 40 people combing the woods. They found one thing, a boot print in the mud halfway down the ditch. Size 12. That was Cole's. But here's the part that chills me. The boot print stopped. Just one impression, deep and clear. No second print. No sign of him turning, stumbling, or walking further. Just a single boot print pressed into the earth, leading nowhere. That was the last trace of him we ever found. The sheriff wrote the report clean and clinical. Deputy missing in line of duty. Search ongoing. But those of us who heard his last words knew better. He didn't say people. He didn't say suspects. He said figures. And his voice, that wasn't the voice of a man who thought he was chasing trespassers. That was the voice of a man who knew something impossible was looking back at him. In the weeks that followed, the department grew quiet. Nobody joked around. Nobody lingered in the halls. At night, when the calls slowed down and the paperwork was done, I'd sit there staring at the radio, waiting to hear his voice again. Sometimes, late at night, I swore I did. Just a flicker of static, a whisper buried deep in the hiss. Not words, not clear, but enough to freeze me, to make me think he was still out there, calling from a place none of us could reach. And that's the part I can't shake. We searched the ground. We searched the river. We searched every farm, every field, but we never searched where the signal came from. Because deep down, none of us wanted to know where that voice had gone. Cole was gone. Just like that. One night, one call, and he was erased. But the sound of his last words still circles in my head. Years later, like a record that never stops spinning, they're in the ditch. Too many. Don't come. And every time I drive down County Road 6, I slow the car without meaning to. I find myself staring into the ditches, half expecting to see them, standing there, waiting, watching, and I wonder if one night the radio will come alive again. If I'll hear Cole's voice whispering from the static, and if I do, if I hear him again, I don't think I'll answer. I didn't sleep the night Cole went missing. None of us did. The station stayed lit like daylight, phones ringing, deputies pacing, the smell of stale coffee filling the halls. But no matter how many people we called in, no matter how many maps we spread across the tables, one fact hung heavy in the room. Cole was gone. By morning, the sheriff made it official. A search party was organized bigger than anything our county had seen in years. They called in state police, volunteers, even a couple of retired deputies who hadn't worn a badge in decades. People came with dogs, ATVs, and beat-up trucks full of supplies. Everyone said the same thing. We'll find him. But I didn't believe it. Not after what I'd heard on that radio. We gathered at a farmhouse near County Road 6. The place belonged to an old couple who offered their barn as a base. I remember standing there in the yard, watching the sun creep over the horizon, feeling the chill of dew on the grass. It should have been comforting. The daylight. The sound of people talking and gearing up. But to me it felt wrong. Like the night hadn't really ended, just stretched itself thinner, hiding in the corners of the day. When we finally moved out, I joined a line of deputies heading into the woods on the south side of the road. The trees grew thick there, branches tangled overhead, blocking out half the light. The ground was soft, covered in rotting leaves that sucked at your boots. Every step made a sound too loud, like the forest was holding its breath. We moved slow, calling Cole's name every few minutes. "Cole! Deputy Cole! Can you hear us?" The words echoed back, thin and hollow. Nothing answered. One of the volunteers brought a bloodhound, a big brown dog with drooping eyes. They gave it a piece of Cole's uniform hat to sniff. The dog whined, circled, and pulled hard toward the ditch where we'd found his cruiser. We followed, hope sparking in our chests. The trail led us deeper, maybe half a mile off the road, until the trees closed in and the air grew damp. That's when the dog stopped. It stood stiff, nose pointed at the ground, tail tucked. Then it whimpered and backed away, whining low in its throat. No amount of coaxing would make it move forward again. The handler cursed under his breath, but I didn't blame the animal. I felt it too, that weight pressing down, heavy and wrong, like walking into a room where someone had just been arguing. We spread out, combing the area. That's when I saw it. A patch of mud near the base of an old oak. Clear as day, a boot print. Deep, wide. Cole's size. I crouched down, heart hammering. The print pointed forward, like he'd been moving deeper into the woods. The edges were sharp, fresh. "He'd been here! Got something!" I shouted. The others crowded around. Another deputy, Hank, found a second print a few feet away, angled slightly left. Same tread, same size. My chest tightened with a strange kind of relief. We had a trail. We followed the prints carefully, marking each one. They led us maybe 30 yards, weaving between trees before stopping at a patch of thicker mud. There, pressed into the earth, was a final boot print. Just one, and then nothing. We searched in widening circles, combed every inch of ground, but the trail ended there like a cut rope. No drag marks, no scuffle, no second print to match the stride. Just a single boot print sinking into the mud, frozen in time. Hank swore under his breath. The sheriff frowned, rubbing his jaw, but said nothing. I just stared at it, my stomach twisting. I remembered the night before, Cole's voice on the radio. They're in the ditch. Too many. Don't come. What had happened between that last call and this lonely print? While the others kept searching, I drifted a little further into the brush. Something white caught my eye, snagged on a branch low to the ground. I reached down and pulled it free. It was cloth. Torn. My throat went dry. It was part of a uniform shirt. The dark green fabric ripped jagged along the edge. The patch was still attached, the county sheriff's star embroidered in yellow thread. Stained dark across the middle, stiff and crusted. I held it up, my hands trembling. Everyone stopped what they were doing. They didn't need me to say it. We all knew it belonged to Cole. The sheriff took it from me, his face pale. He turned it over slowly, then folded it once and slipped it into an evidence bag. Nobody spoke for a long while. The forest was too quiet, as if it were listening. We searched until dusk, and the next day, and the day after that. Helicopters swept the fields. Divers searched the river. Nothing. No body, no weapon, no sign of struggle. Just that shirt and those prints that led nowhere. People started whispering theories. Maybe Cole walked off on his own, faked it. Maybe someone grabbed him, dragged him away without a trace. But those explanations didn't fit. Not for me. I'd heard the fear in his voice. I'd heard the static swallow his words. On the third night, when most of the volunteers had gone home, I sat alone in my cruiser parked by the ditch. The headlights lit up the weeds, the same patch where Cole had called in. I kept staring into the shadows, half expecting to see something move. The radio hissed faintly on the dash. Not a call, not words, just a low crackle like breathing. I leaned close, my chest tight, waiting, but nothing came. I shut it off and sat there in the silence, my hands gripping the wheel. My mind circling the same thought over and over. It wasn't that we couldn't find him. It was that he wasn't meant to be found, and deep down, I think the rest of the deputies knew it too. They just wouldn't say it out loud, because once you admit something like that, once you admit the woods swallowed him whole, you start to wonder who it'll take next. and whether the ditch is still watching, waiting for another set of boot prints to follow. Months passed, and Cole was still gone. His name sat cold on the board at the station, a case number with no answers. The official word was missing in the line of duty. But in the quiet corners of the department, we stopped talking about him at all. It was like a sickness no one wanted to admit we had. Some deputies transferred out. Some asked to switch shifts. Anything to avoid driving County Road 6 at night. Others just shut down, going through the motions with blank eyes. The sheriff kept his jaw set and his voice steady, but even he walked heavier, like his boots were filled with lead. Me, I carried it everywhere. I thought about Cole's last words every time I touched my radio. I replayed that static in my head when I tried to sleep. I started to dread the ditch, the woods, the smell of damp earth. I even avoided driving home past the fields, but none of that compared to the night we got the tape. It came in quietly, slipped into evidence like it was nothing. One of the mechanics at the county garage was cleaning out the impound lot. He'd been assigned to strip down Cole's cruiser. Normally, when a vehicle sits that long, it gets processed, cataloged, parts recycled, stripped for auction. He found the dash cam tucked into the console. Nobody had touched it since the night Cole vanished. The sheriff had ordered it locked, but somehow it was missed. When the mechanic turned it in, I was in the evidence room. I'll never forget how casual he was about it. He just dropped the device into my hands and said, "Guess this belongs to you guys." The weight of it nearly made me sick. I carried it straight to the sheriff. His office was dim, blinds drawn, a single lamp burning. He looked up when I set the dash cam on his desk. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. Close the door. We didn't bring in anyone else. Just the two of us. He plugged it into the old station monitor, and the screen blinked to life. At first, it was nothing. Hours of empty road, headlights cutting through the dark, the hum of the engine steady. The timestamp showed October 14th, the night Cole vanished. We fast-forwarded, the video skipping like a heartbeat. Then around midnight, the cruiser slowed. The headlights swung across the ditch, catching weeds and trees. That's when I felt it, the chill running through my veins. This was it. This was his last call. The camera shook as the cruiser rolled to a stop. The driver's door opened, dome light flashing bright for a second before the dark swallowed it. Cole's shadow stretched across the gravel. Then the door shut. For a minute, the tape showed only empty headlights beaming into the ditch. We could hear faint audio, Cole's voice crackling on the radio, the static eating half his words. "Figures in the ditch." The hair on my arms rose. It was his voice. Exactly how I remembered it. The sheriff leaned forward, his face tight. On the tape, Cole's flashlight beam cut into the trees. He moved into the ditch, the cone of light jerking side to side. Then the picture began to distort. At first, I thought it was interference. The image warped, edges bending, colors bleeding into one another. The trees stretched tall, the grass bent sideways, the screen buzzing with faint lines. Then came the sound, not the wind. Not the radio. A low murmur, like voices speaking all at once, too faint to separate. They rose and fell, echoing in strange rhythms, like words spoken underwater. Cole's breathing picked up, sharp and fast. He muttered something into the radio, too broken to catch, but the voices only grew louder. And then, in the edge of the headlights, something moved. It shot across the beam so fast the frame blurred. Not a person, not an animal. It was tall, too tall, its limbs too long, bending wrong as it passed. Just a flash of black against the white glare, gone in an instant. The sheriff froze, staring at the screen. Another figure darted by, closer this time. Its shape fractured the light, leaving a trail of warped static in its wake. The voices surged, filling the audio with a chorus of broken whispers. Cole's flashlight beam whipped wildly, cutting shadows into the trees. His voice cracked through the static, desperate now. They know I can see them. The camera caught a glimpse then, a figure standing at the far edge of the ditch, half in the light. It didn't move, didn't blink. Its body was narrow, stretched thin, the head tilted far too low like its neck had no strength. The screen glitched, lines tearing through the picture. For a second, the figure was closer, much closer, though the tape hadn't shown it move. Then it was gone. Cole's breathing turned into gasps. The audio tore with static, then hissed with silence. The last thing the tape showed was his flashlight dropping into the mud, the beam shining upward, shaking as if something had picked it up. A shape crossed in front of it, long fingers bending in a way no hand should. Then the tape went black. The sheriff hit stop. The machine clicked, the room thick with silence. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I couldn't move. My body felt locked, like if I shifted even an inch, whatever we'd seen would crawl out of the screen. Finally, the sheriff leaned back, his face pale in the lamplight. He rubbed his temples, then muttered, "This doesn't leave this room." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him we needed answers, that people had to see what happened. But the words died in my throat, because deep down, I knew no one would believe it. The video would get dismissed as tampered, corrupted, fake. And even if they did believe it, what good would that do? The sheriff ejected the tape, slid it back into its case, and locked it in his desk drawer. His eyes met mine, sharp and tired. "Forget it," he said. But I couldn't. That night, lying in bed, I kept seeing the tape play in my head. That blur crossing the headlights. That figure standing still, neck bent low. And that last frame, the fingers stretching across the light. I heard the voices, too. Not through speakers this time. In my own head. Faint whispers, like the tape had burned itself into me. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. They weren't calling for help. They were inviting. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing things on patrol. A flicker at the edge of my headlights. A shadow darting between trees. The radio cutting out, hissing just like it did that night. Once, parked on County Road 6, I swore I saw something standing in the ditch. Just standing there where the weeds bent low. When I shined my light, there was nothing. But I know what I saw, and I know Cole saw it first. The tape might be locked away in a drawer, but it didn't stay buried. Not for me. I carry it with me every shift, every night. Because whatever took Cole didn't just vanish into that ditch. It's still out there. And sometimes, when I drive that road alone, I swear the dash cam hums quietly on its own, like it's waiting to record again. I've worked in law enforcement for more than 20 years. I've seen the things people do to one another, the lies they tell, the games they play when they think they can outsmart the system. I've seen blood on the floor, drunk fights that ended with broken bones, and families torn apart over nothing. But nothing in my career prepared me for the night a man disappeared from one of my own holding cells. We're a small sheriff's office, the kind of place with 2 desks, a worn coffee pot, and 3 holding cells bolted into a concrete block of a building. Most nights they sit empty. When they're not, it's usually someone sleeping off a drunk or cooling down after a domestic call. That night, though, that night was different. His name was Randall Cross, 34 years old. Arrested on a misdemeanor charge, trespassing, resisting, nothing that should have kept him long. He'd been caught wandering around Miller's farm at 2 in the morning, muttering to himself and carrying a crowbar. Miller didn't want to press charges, but policy's policy. We booked him in, planning to let him out once he sobered and saw a judge. I remember when they brought him in. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't high. At least not in the way you'd expect. His eyes were glassy, wide, like he hadn't slept in days. His hands shook when I fingerprinted him. When I asked if he wanted water, he whispered, "Don't leave me in the dark." At first, I thought he was just another paranoid meth head. But as the night went on, I started to doubt that. We locked him in holding cell 2. Standard procedure. Steel door, barred window too small for a man to fit through, no loose screws, no broken locks. That cell has held people twice his size without issue. Around midnight, Deputy Harris checked on him. Harris told me Randall was pacing the length of the cell, muttering words he couldn't quite make out. Said he kept glancing at the corners like he expected something to crawl out of the walls. "Guy's spooked," Harris said. "Like he's waiting for something. I told him to keep an eye on the monitor. Now, we don't have fancy surveillance. Just a grainy black and white camera aimed at each cell, feed looping to the monitor at the front desk. But it does its job. You can see if an inmate's sleeping, standing, pacing, and you can sure as hell see if someone tries to break out. I wish I'd been the one watching the screen. Maybe then I'd understand it better." Harris swore Randall was lying on the bunk when he left the desk to make rounds. He was gone no more than 5 minutes. When he came back, the cell was empty. At first, he thought Randall was just out of frame, maybe crouched under the bunk. But he waited. He watched. And nothing moved. He came running to my office, pale as paper. "Sheriff," he said, "he's gone." I followed him back to the desk, thinking he'd lost his mind. But when I looked at the monitor, my stomach dropped. The cell was empty. We opened the door, went inside. Nothing. Bunk, toilet, sink, bare as the day it was built. No man inside. The door had been locked. The window was intact. No scratches, no broken hinges. The ceiling vent was bolted shut. Randall Cross had simply vanished. We searched the entire building. Every room, every hallway, every storage closet. We walked the perimeter, checked the lot, even opened dumpsters. Nothing. It was like he'd been swallowed whole. And the strangest part, the lock on the cell door was still engaged. We had to use the key to open it. I kept asking myself how. How could a man disappear from a concrete cell? No tools, no help, no noise. There was nowhere for him to go. But then we checked the tape. That's when everything got worse. The recording showed Randall lying on his bunk staring at the ceiling. He wasn't moving much, just shifting now and then, rubbing his temples. Harris left the desk at 12:07. At 12:09, Randall sat up. He looked toward the corner of the cell, the far left side. His lips moved like he was whispering, though the tape had no sound. Then he stood, walked to the corner, and pressed his hands flat against the wall. He stayed that way for almost a full minute. Then the picture glitched. Just a hiccup, like static rolling across the screen. When it cleared, Randall was gone. I replayed it a dozen times, staring at that screen until my eyes burned. One frame, he was there. The next, the cell was empty. No blur, no movement, no shadow slipping away. He didn't walk out. He didn't climb. He just wasn't there anymore. I tried to tell myself it was a malfunction. A skipped frame. Bad wiring. But even then, it didn't explain the locked door, the untouched vent, the sealed window. The sheriff in me wanted to write it up as escape, but the man in me knew better. Randall Cross didn't escape. He was taken. By what, or by who, I couldn't say. But I still remember his words when we booked him in. "Don't leave me in the dark." Like he knew what was waiting for him. After that night, I stopped trusting the cells. I stopped trusting the walls. Because I realized something I wish I hadn't. A locked door doesn't mean safety. Not when the thing you're hiding from isn't outside. It's already in the room. And sometimes, it's waiting in the corner. I didn't step foot in holding cell 2 for days after Randall vanished. I told myself it was because the investigators needed time. Because protocol demanded it remain sealed until the reports were filed. But the truth is simpler. I was afraid. That cell had changed. The night Randall disappeared, something left its mark on it, even if no one else could see it yet. When I walked past, I felt it, a heaviness pressing at the base of my skull, like a storm brewing in silence, waiting for the right moment to break open. Harris avoided it, too. He stopped taking his breaks near the cells, stopped glancing at the monitors. Whenever I caught him at the desk, he had his chair turned away, eyes fixed on the window instead of the screens. One night, 3 days after the disappearance, I was the one on shift when the first smear showed up. I was filing reports when the radio crackled. Deputy Miller's voice came through, calm but a little tight. "Sheriff, you better come to the cells." I set my pen down. "What's wrong? Just come see for yourself." My stomach sank, but I went. The hallway was dim, the fluorescent buzzing faintly overhead. Miller stood outside cell 2, his arms folded, his face pale. He didn't speak. He just nodded at the little square window in the steel door. I looked. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. The far wall of the cell looked darker, smeared with something uneven. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the smell hitting me before my eyes caught up. It was blood, not painted, not spilled, but dragged across the concrete in long hand-shaped streaks. Palm prints, fingers trailing down like someone had clawed at the wall with wet hands. I froze in the doorway. The cell had been locked since the night Randall disappeared. I had the only key. No one had been inside. "Jesus Christ," Miller whispered. I forced myself forward. The smears were fresh. Not wet exactly, but tacky. Like they'd been laid there only hours earlier. There were at least 5 distinct handprints. All right hands, all the same size. I touched one of them with my glove. The residue was thick, dark, unmistakable. Blood. The reports had already been filed. Forensics had already cleared the cell. Yet here it was, marked again, as if someone had come back to remind us. But that wasn't what made me step back. It was the direction of the smears. They weren't coming from the bunk, or the door, or even the vent. They started low, near the floor, and dragged upward, ending higher than a man could comfortably reach. Like someone had pressed their bloody hand to the wall, then lifted, stretching tall, too tall, until the fingertips scraped near the ceiling. I told Miller to get the camera. We documented everything. I filed it. But even as I wrote the report, I knew what would happen. No one would believe it. The official explanation was vandalism. Someone must have broken protocol, entered the sealed cell, staged it for attention. That's what the sheriff told the board. That's what went into the files. But I knew better. Because that night, after the others went home, I sat at the monitor again. The black and white feed showed cell 2, dark and still. The handprints gleamed faintly, the camera catching their shine. And then, sometime around 3 in the morning, I saw something move. Not a person, not a shadow. Just the faintest ripple, like the air bending in the corner where Randall once stood. The feed fuzzed, static crawling across the screen. When it cleared, a new smear was on the wall. Long and sharp, dragged downward this time, fresh enough to shine. I was the only one watching. I remember staring at the monitor, heart pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. There was no sound. No figure, no hand. Just the blood, appearing where none had been before. I didn't go inside that night. I didn't unlock the door. The next morning, when Harris came in, I told him. He shook his head, muttered something about bad wiring, about glare from the lights. But when he checked the cell himself, his face drained of color, because there it was. A new handprint, lower, smaller, but deeper red than the others. Like something had added its mark while the world slept. We cleaned the walls, disinfected them, painted over the stains. By the afternoon, the cell looked spotless again. But 2 days later, the smears came back. Different this time. Higher, bolder. And I swear, though I'll never admit it in a report, that when I walked into that cell, I could feel heat radiating from them, like the blood was still alive. It didn't matter how many times we washed it, how many coats of paint we laid down, the handprints always returned. Sometimes one, sometimes several, always in the dead of night, always in cell 2. I started keeping the lights on, thinking maybe it was the darkness feeding it. But that didn't help. The prints just grew thicker, layered over one another, 100 hands clawing upward into nowhere. Some nights I sat staring at the monitor until dawn, afraid to blink. And sometimes when the static rolled across the screen, I thought I could hear it. Faint scratching, like nails dragging against concrete. We never reopened that cell. Officially, it was out of service due to structural concerns. That was the phrase we used. Structural concerns. But in my mind, I knew the truth. The cell wasn't broken. It was claimed. And every night since, I've wondered if Randall's words weren't a warning, but a plea. Don't leave me in the dark, because maybe the dark wasn't what he feared. Maybe it was the thing waiting in it, and maybe now it had made that cell its own. I've lost count of how many times I've walked past holding cell 2 since the night Randall vanished. Every time I do, I tell myself it's just a room. 4 walls, a bunk bolted to concrete, a toilet, a door. Nothing more. But I can't ignore the way my chest tightens when I pass it. Can't ignore how my eyes always flick to that narrow window, half expecting to see a face staring back at me. By the time the blood prints began showing up, most of the older hands at the department knew better than to linger in that hallway. We did our jobs, filed our reports, kept the cell sealed. Officially, it was out of service. Unofficially, we were all afraid of it. The younger deputies, though, the new ones, they didn't know the history. They didn't see Randall vanish. They didn't watch those prints bloom like wounds across a wall that no one touched. but they learned fast. The first report came from Deputy Lasker. He was fresh out of the academy, still sharp with the energy only rookies carry. One night, just after 2 in the morning, he came to me pale as a ghost. "Sheriff," he said, voice shaking. "Someone's in the cell." I asked him what he meant. He swallowed hard. "I heard them screaming." I followed him to the monitor. The feed showed cell 2, empty, still the faint outline of smears along the far wall. Nothing moved, but Lasker swore he'd heard it. He was on desk duty, sipping coffee, half listening to the hum of the radios when it started. A voice, ragged and desperate, echoing down the hallway. Screams, long and hollow, like someone being torn apart. He thought at first another deputy had brought someone in without logging them. He checked the cell doors. 1 locked, 3 empty, all except cell 2. The screaming had come from behind it. He didn't open the door. He just stood there, frozen, listening to the sound rattle the steel. By the time he gathered the nerve to call me, the noise had stopped. I didn't know what to tell him. Part of me wanted to write it off as stress. First night shifts can do strange things to a man. I told him I'd keep an ear out, told him to keep watching the monitors. But the next week, it happened again. This time, it was Deputy Morgan. She'd been with us a year, steady as they come, never rattled on duty. She swore up and down she'd heard the same thing. Screams rising from whispers to full-throated cries, filling the corridor outside cell 2. She told me it was worse than the sound itself. It was what came after. She said when the screaming stopped, she heard someone whisper her name. I asked her to repeat herself. Her voice cracked when she did. "Sheriff, I heard my name." She handed in her resignation the next morning. Said the overnight shift wasn't for her. I didn't argue. After that, the reports kept coming. Always the same. Always in the small hours of the night. Deputies would be sitting at their desk, writing reports, sipping cold coffee, and then it would begin. A voice from the sealed cell, ragged and sharp, echoing down the hall. Sometimes it was one long scream. Sometimes it was several, broken by gasps. One deputy swore he heard pounding, too. Fists slamming against the steel, shaking the frame. He thought the door would buckle. But when he went to check, the cell was still locked, untouched. We tried to prove it. We set up extra cameras, extra mics, even ran the audio through the recorder. Nothing. The feeds showed silence, static, the empty gray shape of the cell. The screams never carried beyond the hallway. Only the deputies on duty heard them, and soon enough they started refusing shifts. I can't blame them. Sleep is thin enough in this line of work. Add the thought of hearing a man scream himself hoarse from a cell that should be empty, and it wears on you. We lost 2 more deputies before winter. Both left without warning, badges on the desk, lockers empty. And me, I stayed, because the truth is, I'd heard it too. The first time, I told myself it was just my head playing tricks. Long nights, too much coffee, too much silence. But the second time, I knew better. It came low at first. A moan rising from the walls, so faint I thought it was the pipes. But then it sharpened, turned into words I couldn't make out. Turned into a cry so raw and human it froze me in my chair. It wasn't a stranger's voice, it was Randall's. I knew the sound of his voice from the night we booked him. The same edge of fear, the same rasp. And hearing it then, echoing down the hallway, I understood something I hadn't before. Randall never left that cell, not really. When the screams finally faded, I sat there in the silence, my heart hammering. I couldn't bring myself to open the door. Couldn't bring myself to see if the wall had changed again. Instead, I sat at the desk until the sun rose, the light spilling through the blinds like nothing had happened. But I knew better. And now, every time I hear the rookies complain, every time one of them says they can't take another overnight shift, I understand, because those screams aren't just sounds. They're reminders of the night Randall begged not to be left in the dark, of the blood that appears on walls no one touches, of the voices that whisper names in the dead of night. I tell myself it's just echoes, just memory looping through the halls of this old building. But sometimes, when the sound carries long and thin, I swear I can hear something else layered beneath it. Not pain, not terror, laughter. And that frightens me most of all, because if Randall's still in that cell screaming through the walls, something else is there with him. Something that doesn't scream. Something that only listens. It's been over a decade since I first laid eyes on that patrol car, and even now I can still see it as clear as the night we found it. I can close my eyes and smell the dust, the cooling engine, the faint trace of oil seeping into the gravel. Some things stick to a man, no matter how many years he tries to bury them. We had a deputy out on the reservation road that evening. His name was Carter Hayes. He was one of the younger ones, maybe 26, sharp kid, polite and eager to prove himself. That road was his patrol beat more often than not. Long, flat stretches of asphalt with nothing but sagebrush, dark hills, and the occasional trailer scattered miles apart. Most nights you could drive it for an hour and not see another soul. I was at the station that night drinking stale coffee and finishing reports when dispatch called in. Carter hadn't checked in. No radio contact for close to an hour. That wasn't like him. He was by the book. He called in even if he was pulling over a busted taillight. I told Harris, my undersheriff, to roll with me. We headed out down County Road 17, the one that cuts across the edge of the reservation. The sky was dark. No moon, only a scatter of stars. You know the kind of night I mean. Quiet enough you feel every bump in the steering wheel, every breath in your chest. About 10 miles out, we spotted the cruiser. It was parked half in the road, half on the shoulder, lights still flashing in the dark. The engine was running. Both front doors hung wide open. I pulled in behind it, headlights cutting across the back bumper. Dust swirled up around us, settling heavy. Looks like he just walked away, Harris muttered. But I knew better. I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The red and blue lights spun slow across the sagebrush, casting the land in colors that didn't belong out there. The air was still. Too still. I called Carter's name. No answer. The first thing I noticed was his radio, still clipped to the dash. The mic dangled from its cord, swaying faintly like someone had dropped it in a hurry. The second thing I noticed was his coffee. A paper cup, lid popped off, lying on its side in the gravel by the driver's door. The liquid inside had cooled to a dark puddle, already drawing ants. No signs of struggle. No blood. No tracks leading off into the brush. Just the car waiting, humming in the night. We swept the area with our flashlights. Walked the ditch on both sides. Checked under the cruiser, inside the trunk, even down into the culvert where the road dipped low. Nothing. It was like Carter had stepped out and simply evaporated. I radioed dispatch, told them we had an abandoned unit, deputy missing. Within the hour, more cruisers arrived. We fanned out along the road, combing the sagebrush, calling his name into the empty night. But the desert doesn't answer back. By 3 in the morning, we pulled back to regroup. Carter's cruiser sat exactly where we found it. Engine still ticking softly, lights still cutting through the dark. It felt wrong to shut it off, like we'd be closing the book on him if we did. I remember leaning against the hood, staring out at the horizon. That silence. It wasn't the kind you get on a normal night. It was heavy, weighted, like the land itself was holding its breath. And that's when I noticed the doors. I'd looked a dozen times already, but something about the way the light caught the paint made me stop. On the inside edge of the driver's side door, just above the handle, was a smudge. Dark. Thin. I leaned closer. It was a handprint. Not full, not clean, just the tips of fingers dragged downward. 4 streaks, long and faint, ending in sharp points near the metal trim. I didn't tell the others at first. Not then. I didn't know what to make of it. Could have been dirt. Could have been Carter himself grabbing the frame in a rush. But deep down I knew it wasn't. The lines were too thin. Too sharp. Not fingers. Claws. We brought the cruiser back to the yard that morning. Logged everything. Filed the reports. But it didn't matter. No tracks. No signs. No Carter. He was gone. We searched for days after that. Volunteers came out, locals, even some of the tribal rangers. We covered miles of ground. Helicopters swept the desert with infrared. Dogs ran the brush. Nothing. No body. No sign of struggle. No explanation. Just an abandoned cruiser on an empty road, doors open like a mouth, gasping for air. I've been in this job long enough to know people vanish. They run off, get lost, turn up weeks later. But not Carter. He wasn't the type. And even if he had run, where did he go? There was nowhere to go. Just miles of desert and hills, and yet not one footprint in the dirt. For a long time, I couldn't drive that road at night without seeing those doors hanging open. Without hearing the faint tick of that engine cooling in the dark, I told myself it was just bad luck. A missing man, an open case. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about those marks on the door. Thin, sharp, and too high up for a man on his knees to leave. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. And every time I hear Carter's voice the way he used to call over the radio. Calm, steady, dependable. Except now, when I imagine it, his voice is swallowed in static, like something else is holding the mic. Something waiting in the dark, just beyond the edge of the lights. People still ask me if I ever understood what happened to Deputy Hayes. The truth is, no, not in a way that makes sense on paper, but there was a night, a few days after we found his cruiser, when I was told something I've never repeated outside of official walls, something that never made its way into any report. I was sitting in my office, head in my hands, staring at maps and search grids. We'd spent days combing that desert, every canyon, every ravine, every dry wash. Nothing. Not even a dropped radio battery or a torn thread of uniform. That's when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was steady, calm. An elder from the reservation. He told me to come see him. Said he had something I needed to hear. I hesitated. I'd worked alongside the tribal police plenty of times, but this was different. This wasn't official channels. This was personal. Still, I went. The drive out was quiet. One of those late afternoons where the sun sinks heavy and orange, casting long shadows across the land. By the time I pulled up to the elder's home, the air had cooled, and the crickets had just begun their song. He was waiting for me outside. Old man, thin frame, face lined deep with years of sun and wind. His eyes, though, they carried something heavier. Like he was holding back more than words. We sat by a fire pit behind his house. He didn't waste time. "You won't find your man," he said. His voice was low even. Not cruel, just certain. I asked him what he meant. He crossed their path, he told me. "The old ones, that road, it runs through places better left untouched. Your deputy didn't know. He stepped where he shouldn't have." I tried to push for clarity. Who were the old ones? What did he mean by paths? He only shook his head. "You wouldn't believe me. Even if I told you, it would sit wrong in your heart, like a stone you can't swallow." I remember staring into that fire, watching the sparks twist up into the night. I wanted to dismiss him, chalk it up to superstition, to folklore meant to scare children. But something in the way he spoke, so calm, so certain, made my skin crawl. He leaned closer then, his voice dropping lower. "You saw the marks, didn't you? That froze me, 'cause I hadn't told anyone, not about the smudges on the inside of Carter's door, not about those long, thin streaks ending in points too sharp for human fingers. I asked him how he knew. "They leave signs," he said. "Warnings if you know how to read them." He wasn't taken without cause. He was in their way. Once that happens, you can't pull a man back. I wanted to argue, to say we were trained men, that we'd searched every inch, that if Carter was out there, we would have found him. But then the elder said something that has followed me every day since. You're looking for him like he's still in your world, but he isn't. The way he said it, flat, final, like stating the color of the sky, made my stomach turn. I asked him, plain as I could, what he wanted me to do with this information. "Leave it," he said. "Don't send more men down that road. Don't go digging where the ground won't give answers. The old ones don't like to be chased." I sat there in the glow of the fire, the desert night stretching out around us, and for the first time in my career I felt small, like a child hearing something they're not supposed to. I thanked him, shook his hand, and drove back in silence. But I couldn't leave it. Not really. That night back at the station, I kept thinking about Carter. About the way his radio mic dangled, the way the engine ticked, the way the handprint dragged down the inside of the door. If what the elder said was true, then Carter hadn't just disappeared. He'd been taken by something older than the land itself. The next morning, Harris asked me how I was holding up. I almost told him about the elder's words. Almost. But then I looked at him, at the weight he was already carrying, and I kept it to myself. What good would it do, passing on that kind of burden? Still, I couldn't shake it. I started digging in old case files. Incidents out on that same stretch of road. Reports that never went anywhere. Missing persons, unexplained accidents, cars left idling in the dark, and there were more than I expected. Not a lot, not enough to raise red flags at the time, but enough to see a pattern. Enough to make me wonder if Carter was just the latest in a long line of vanishings no one wanted to name out loud. That's when I realized the elder hadn't been giving me a warning for nothing. He knew. He'd seen it before, and maybe, just maybe, that's why his words cut so deep. You're looking for him like he's still in your world. But he isn't. Some nights when I can't sleep, I go back to that thought. I picture Carter stepping out of his cruiser, squinting into the dark, hearing something in the brush. I picture him calling out, hand resting on his holster, and then I picture him realizing, too late, that whatever answered him wasn't a man. That his last breath on this earth was taken with the knowledge that something older, something unseen had noticed him. The elder told me to leave it. That's what he said. But how do you leave a man behind when he wore your badge, carried your trust, called you sheriff with respect in his voice? You don't. You carry him with you every day. Still, I've never driven that road the same way again. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm heading home and I see the desert stretch out empty in both directions, I feel it, the weight of unseen eyes, watching, waiting, the old ones. If you asked me today if I believe in them, I wouldn't give you a straight answer. Some things aren't meant for belief. They just are. But I'll tell you this much, I stopped, looking for Carter Hayes the way a sheriff looks for a missing man. And I started remembering him the way you remember the dead. Because whatever path he crossed out there, it wasn't one he was ever meant to walk back from. The third day of searching was when things stopped feeling like police, work, and started feeling like something else. I had a dozen men stretched across a half-mile of open desert. We walked slow, shoulder to shoulder, eyes on the ground. The sun was punishing, burning through the back of my neck, but no one complained. The silence between us said more than words. We were following faint signs left near the road, scuffs in the dirt, bent brush, little things that could have belonged to Carter. We all wanted to believe they did. About an hour in, one of the younger deputies called out. His voice cracked in the heat. I walked over, shading my eyes with my hand. He was pointing at the sand, his face pale. There they were. Boot prints. Standard issue, same tread as every deputy's boots. They led away from the roadside and straight out into the desert. For the first time since we'd started, I felt something like hope. We had a trail, a direction. We marked the prints and began following, step by step. The story of his last walk laid itself out in the dust. You could see where he'd slowed, where his heels dug deeper, where maybe he'd stopped to listen. But then, the story changed. Alongside those boots, a second set of prints appeared. Not human. The best way I can explain it is this. They were too large, too wide, and ended in sharp impressions that curved like talons. Each step sank deeper than the boots, like whatever made them carried weight beyond its size. At first, no one said anything. We just stood there, staring down, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. One deputy muttered that it could have been an animal. A bear, maybe. But he didn't sound convinced. None of us did. We kept walking. The boot prints and the clawed ones ran side by side for a stretch, almost as if Carter hadn't noticed. But then the boot prints shifted. They grew uneven, crossing over each other. A stumble. A struggle. The claw marks grew deeper. My throat felt dry, not from the heat, but from something heavier pressing down. Every step we took made me feel less like we were searching and more like we were trespassing. We followed until the sun hung low, turning the sand blood red. That's when the trail stopped. The boots, the claws, all of it, just gone. The last few impressions ended at a patch of hard-packed ground, flat as a board, nothing beyond it. No drag marks, no return trail, no sign of turning back. It was like the earth had swallowed them. The men spread out, circling, trying to pick the trail back up. I watched their shoulders tense, the way they kept glancing back toward me for answers I didn't have. I crouched down at the last clear print. It was Carter's boot, sharp in the dust, toes pointed forward. The next step should have been there, but it wasn't. Beside it, one of those clawed impressions pressed deep enough to crack the dry soil. I brushed my hand over it. The edges were sharp. Too sharp for erosion, too sharp for anything I knew lived out there. The deputy who'd first spotted the prints knelt beside me. His lips moved, but no sound came. Finally, he whispered, "What the hell made that?" I didn't answer, because the truth was, I didn't want to say the thought out loud. We called off the search for the day. The men needed rest, and night falls quick in the desert, but none of us wanted to leave that spot. It felt wrong to turn our backs on it, like something would rise up the moment we weren't looking. Back at the station, no one talked much during the debrief. A couple of the younger deputies tried to reason it out. Large mountain lion, maybe some kind of distorted erosion. One even joked about dinosaurs. The laughter was thin, brittle, gone as soon as it came. I sat at the head of the table, staring at the dust still clinging to my boots. I knew what the elder had told me about paths, about the old ones, and now I had proof under my own feet that something had walked with Carter. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept seeing the trail, step after step, until it vanished. I kept hearing the silence of my men when they looked at me, expecting logic, reason, leadership, things I'd always carried with me without hesitation. But out there, in that red sand, reason had been stripped away. I thought about Carter. How long he'd walked before he realized he wasn't alone. Did he hear it breathing behind him? Did he feel the ground tremble with its steps? Or did he only notice when it was too late? I'll never know. The next morning, I looked at the search maps. Circles, grids, markers. They felt meaningless now. Paper trying to explain something the desert itself had already swallowed. We went back out again, of course. That was our duty. But deep down, I knew Carter wasn't lost. He wasn't wandering, waiting for us to find him. He'd been taken off the path of men. The elder's words came back to me in full force. You're looking for him like he's still in your world, but he isn't. And as much as I hated to admit it, the tracks in the dust had already told me the same thing. After the prints disappeared, I should have ended the search. Part of me wanted to. The elder's warning was still fresh in my head, and the claw marks in the dirt had burned themselves into my memory. But Carter was one of ours, and I couldn't just go back to my desk while his trail ended in silence. So I told the men we'd post up near the spot where we found his cruiser, just for a night, a stakeout to see if anything stirred when the sun went down. It was the kind of plan you make when you're desperate. Thin, flimsy, but better than nothing. We rolled out just before dusk. The air was cooling, the desert stretching flat and endless in all directions. Carter's cruiser had been hauled back to the impound lot weeks before, but when I parked my truck on the shoulder of Reservation Road, I swore I could still see the outline where it had sat. We set up quiet. 2 units down the road, one back near the dry wash. Radios low, lights off. Just the red glow of cigarettes in the dark, the creak of gear shifting as the men settled in. The first few hours were still. Too still. Out there, you expect coyotes, owls, even the whisper of wind across the scrub. But that night, the desert was mute, like the land itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, I started hearing it. At first, I thought it was the wind, a faint, low rhythm drifting across the sand. But the longer I listened, the more I realized these were voices, whispers. They slid under the skin, thin and steady, like they weren't meant for ears at all. I grabbed my radio and asked if anyone else heard it. There was a pause, just static, and then a deputy muttered, "Yeah, Sheriff, we hear it." His voice cracked in a way I'd never heard from him before. The whispers grew louder, rising and falling in waves. It wasn't English. Wasn't Spanish either. The syllables bent and twisted in ways I couldn't follow, like water over rocks. But there was rhythm to it, chanting. That's when Deputy Harris whispered, "Sheriff, look." I turned, and my stomach dropped. Out there on the road, clear as day in the pale wash of moonlight, figures were standing around the empty space where Carter's cruiser had once been. Shadowy, tall, unmoving. They weren't men. Not exactly. Too thin, too long, their shoulders bent at odd angles. The way they stood. It reminded me of scarecrows nailed into the earth and left to sway in silence. The chanting grew sharper, rising in a pitch that made the hair stand on my neck. I wanted to call out, to demand an answer, but my throat locked. Some instinct told me not to draw their attention. One of the younger deputies didn't have the same instinct. His door clicked open, and before I could stop him, he stepped out onto the gravel. His voice cracked as he called, "Who's out there?" The figures didn't move, but the chanting stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Heavy, expectant. The deputy froze, halfway between his cruiser and the road. He looked back at me, eyes wide, waiting for a nod. Some kind of order. I didn't give it, because I was staring past him at the shadows, where one of them had tilted its head. It was subtle, slow like a puppet on a string, but the moment it did, every other figure followed, heads tilting in unison until they were all fixed on him. That broke me. I barked at him to get back in his unit now. He didn't argue. He sprinted back, slammed the door, locked it. His breathing rattled over the radio, fast and shallow. The figures didn't move closer. They just watched. Then, as sudden as they appeared, they were gone. Not like they walked away. Not like they melted into the desert. One blink, they were there. The next, nothing but moonlight on empty asphalt. The chanting never came back. We sat in silence, the kind that hurts your ears. Nobody reached for the radio. Nobody dared start the truck. We stayed frozen until the sky started bleeding gray with dawn. When I finally stepped out, the road looked the same as it always had. No tracks, no signs, no proof, but I knew what I saw. And worse, I knew my men had seen it too. Their pale faces told me enough. Back at the station, we didn't file a report. Not officially. I wrote down unfounded observation. That's the phrase you use when there's nothing solid to pin a claim on. But inside, I knew it was a lie. That night out on Reservation Road, we hadn't been searching anymore, we'd been warned. And Carter, if he was still out there, wasn't coming back the way we wanted. Even now, I can still hear it. That rhythm in the whispers. The way the voices wrapped around the night like smoke. It comes back sometimes when the house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts. I tell myself it was the wind. Trick of the ears. Shadows stretched by the moon, but I don't believe that. Not really, because when I close my eyes, I still see them standing there. Still, patient, waiting. And I know deep in my bones that the old ones hadn't just crossed Carter's path. They were watching ours too. It was 3 months after Carter vanished when the call came. By then, the searches were long over. The flyers were fading on bulletin boards, the volunteers had gone back to their lives, and the department had moved his name from missing to presumed lost. That's the kind of phrase that gets stamped on a file so people can sleep at night, but I couldn't. I was still carrying his absence like a weight across my chest. That night, I was in the dispatch room, half asleep over a stack of reports when the radio crackled. At first, I thought it was static, just another late-night glitch. But then I heard it. A voice. Carter's voice. Dispatch. This is Unit 12. I need backup. The pen slid out of my hand. My throat went dry. The dispatcher froze, wide-eyed, her fingers hovering over the board. She looked at me like she needed permission to breathe. And then the radio hissed again. Do you copy? This is Deputy Carter Hayes, Unit 12, requesting assistance. It was him. Same cadence, same rasp in his throat. I'd sat through years of briefings with that voice. I knew it like my own, but it couldn't be him. Not after all that time. Not after what we'd found out there. I grabbed the mic, my hand shaking more than I'd like to admit. This is Sheriff Lane. Carter, is that you? What's your 20? For a second, only static answered. Then, I'm on Reservation Road. Mile marker 33. Something's in the ditch. Please, hurry! My stomach turned. 33 was the exact stretch where his cruiser had been abandoned. I told dispatch to send units, and before I knew it, I was in my truck, red lights spinning against the dark. The desert swallowed the sound of my engine as I tore down that road. Every mile closer, the dread deepened, pressing heavier into my chest. When I reached mile 33, I pulled over hard. Dust rose in the beams of my headlights, but the road was empty. No cruiser. No figure waving me down. Nothing but the same silence we'd stood in months before. I radioed him. "Carter, this is Lane. I'm here." "Where are you?" No answer. Just when I thought the line was dead, his voice slipped back through, faint and fractured. "They're here. Hurry." I swear to God, it sounded like he was right outside my truck, whispering into the night air. I stepped out, my boots crunching on gravel, hand resting on my holster. The desert stretched in both directions, empty and endless. But then I heard it. Not the whispers this time. Not the chanting. It was his breathing. Ragged, uneven, close. So close I felt it in my ear, though there was no one there. I turned my light toward the ditch. The beam cut across the sand and brush. And for a second, just a second, I saw him. Carter, standing half in shadow, uniform torn, face pale and gaunt. His eyes caught the light and glinted like an animal's. His lips moved, but the sound that came out wasn't words, just a broken hum, a distortion like radio static twisted into a human throat. I blinked, and he was gone. The beam fell on empty sand. The ditch was silent. Behind me, my radio squealed with feedback, sharp enough to pierce my skull. Through it came his voice again, clear as ever. "Requesting backup. They're here." And then, silence. By the time the other units arrived, I must have looked like hell. They asked what I saw, what I heard. I told them the truth, or at least some of it. Enough to get them looking into the brush, walking the ditch line, calling out his name. Of course, we found nothing. No prints, no cruiser, no deputy waiting for help. Back at the station, the dispatcher swore she'd heard it too. Word for word. But the recording system hadn't saved it. That whole block of time was blank. Just static hiss where Carter's voice should have been. The men wanted answers. I gave them none. Because the truth was, I didn't have any. That night, alone in my office, I replayed it in my mind. His tone, the urgency, the fear. It wasn't the voice of a ghost. Not the way people tell stories. It was real. Raw. Like he was still out there calling from just beyond reach. But if that was true, what did it mean? Was he trapped somewhere none of us could follow? Or worse, had something learned his voice? Was it luring us, testing us, waiting to see if we'd come running again? The thought chewed at me until dawn. I still hear him sometimes. The crackle of his mic, the way he'd say, "Unit 12," like it was just another routine stop. I'll be driving home, radio low, and through the hum of static, his voice will break in, faint as a sigh. "Do you copy?" I never answer anymore, because whatever is out there on Reservation Road, it doesn't need more deputies to bring into the dark. Carter's gone. Maybe he's been gone since that first night. Maybe we were fools for ever thinking otherwise, but his voice is still out there, and God help me. Part of me still wants to answer. It started on a night thick with rain. The kind of storm that drowns the whole county in static, where even the strongest signals break apart and vanish into the noise. I was sitting in dispatch, listening to the storm beat against the roof when it happened. At first I thought it was just the interference we always get during weather like that. The radio hissing, the occasional crackle, bursts of silence where voices should be. Nothing new. Nothing worth noticing, but then I heard something different. A voice, not one of ours. It was faint, breaking in and out between bursts of static. The tone was sharp, urgent. I leaned closer to the receiver, trying to make sense of it. "Copy. Station." "Help me." The dispatcher turned to me, her face pale. She shook her head before I could even ask. "It's not on the roster. None of ours are out there tonight." We listened, both of us frozen, as the voice cut through again. Louder this time. "Unit 12, requesting backup." My blood ran cold. Unit 12 hadn't been in service for months, not since Carter disappeared. I snatched the mic from the desk, my voice louder than I meant. "Identify yourself. This is Sheriff Lane. What's your call sign?" For a moment, nothing. Just the storm chewing the line into pieces. And then, "Can't get out." "Please, God." The words bent, twisted, like they were being dragged through water. A second later, the signal was gone, swallowed whole by the static. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. The dispatcher wouldn't look at me. Neither of us spoke. We just waited, listening to the empty hiss, half expecting that voice to break in again. But it didn't. Not that night. The next morning, I tried to explain it away. Weather does strange things to radio waves. Frequencies bounce, overlap, carry further than they should. I told myself it was just another deputy, maybe from a neighboring county, bleeding into our channel. But deep down, I knew better. Because the voice I heard wasn't some stranger's. It was Carter's. Over the next few weeks, it kept happening. Always during storms. Always when the rain was heaviest, when the thunder shook the walls of the station. At first, it was just scraps of words, half sentences that didn't fit together. "They're coming. Out of the ditch. Please hurry." But soon, the messages grew longer, clearer, like someone on the other side of the storm was learning how to reach us. One night, I was driving home when the radio in my cruiser came alive on its own. The channel dial spun without me touching it, locking onto dispatch. The voice came through, strong enough to cut through the roar of the rain. "Sheriff Lane. Do you copy?" I gripped the wheel, every muscle tight. "Yes, this is Lane. Who is this?" Static. Then a low crackle. "You left me." The voice wasn't just familiar. It was him, Carter. I slammed the brakes, my cruiser skidding on the slick road. The radio hissed again, filling the cabin with white noise so thick it felt alive. "Lane, they won't let me go." Then silence. I sat there in the dark, the storm flooding the windshield, trying to catch my breath. After that night, I stopped making excuses. I started keeping track of the incidents, writing down the dates and times, the phrases I could make out. A pattern began to form. Every storm carried him back. Every night the rain came down hard enough, the dead frequency opened like a door, and his voice stepped through. Some of the deputies refused to listen. They'd turn their radios off during storms, muttering about bad wiring or atmospheric skip. But the younger ones, those who'd joined after Carter vanished, they weren't so quick to dismiss it. A few of them swore they'd heard voices too. Not just Carter's, but others. Voices chanting in languages they didn't recognize. Voices whispering their own names. Voices laughing softly in the static, as though the storm itself was mocking them. One rookie said he'd heard his mother calling him through the channel, even though she'd been dead for years. He quit the next day. The worst was when the interference followed me home. One night, I left the station late, too tired to think straight. The storm was still going, rain hammering my porch roof as I sat inside with a cup of coffee, trying to calm my nerves. That's when the static started. Not from the radio, from my television. The screen flickered, lines of distortion crawling across it. And then, faint but unmistakable, Carter's voice came through the speakers. "Lane, open the door." I dropped the mug. It shattered across the floor, coffee spreading like blood. The TV snapped to black. I didn't sleep that night. I know what most people would say. That stress was getting to me. That I was hearing what I wanted or feared to hear. But that's the thing. I didn't want this. I wanted Carter to be gone, laid to rest one way or another. Not trapped between storms, bleeding into our world like some half-forgotten signal. But the frequency kept coming back, dragging him with it. And every time his words grew stranger. "Don't follow the lights. They're in the walls. They keep me in the dirt. But I can still see the sky." I tried to make sense of it, piecing together a map from the fragments. But no matter how many times I listened, the meaning slipped through my hands. All I knew was that it was him, and he was still out there. The last time I heard him, the storm was the worst we'd had in years. Power lines down, roads flooded, dispatch running on backup generators. The frequency cut in just past midnight. This time, his voice was clearer than ever, sharp enough to slice through the static. "Lane, they're close. Don't come looking. Please, don't." Then something else broke in behind him. Not words, not anything human. A howl, stretched thin and metallic, echoing as though it came from the bottom of the earth itself. The channel went dead. The storm passed with the sunrise, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the thunder ever had. I haven't heard Carter since that night. But every time the rain begins, every time the static hums faintly through the wires, I feel myself leaning closer, waiting, because the dead frequency is still out there. And when it opens again, I know whose voice I'll hear. The night Sheriff Lane disappeared, the storm had been building for hours. It rolled over the valley slow and heavy, like it was carrying something with it. The air felt swollen, full of static, the kind that makes your hair stand up even before the lightning starts. I was on shift at the time, sitting in my cruiser off County Road 9, half listening to the rain on the roof when dispatch called me. Unit 6, Sheriff Lane is headed out. He wants all deputies on Channel 3 for check-ins, I answered back, my voice tight in my throat. Copy that. I knew why he was going. The interference had started again. That voice, the one we weren't supposed to talk about anymore. Lane had been chasing it for weeks, writing down times and places, trying to figure out where it was coming from. He didn't tell most of the others, but he told me. Said I was the only one who didn't laugh when he brought it up. I didn't laugh because I'd heard it too. Around 11, the storm broke over us. Rain like sheets of metal, lightning every few seconds, turning the desert into a flashing, colorless wasteland. Lane's voice came over the channel. Steady at first. This is Sheriff Lane en route down Reservation Road. I've got a strong signal. Same as before. Keep this channel clear unless I call. I remember the way his words echoed in my cruiser, bouncing around the tight space. He sounded calm. Too calm. Like he was talking himself into it. For a while, it was just silence. The hiss of rain. The occasional burst of static. I gripped the wheel, staring out into the storm, feeling that itch in the back of my skull that told me something was wrong. Then his voice cracked through again. Lane to dispatch. I'm hearing it. Closer than before. Not just interference. It's clearer tonight. The dispatcher tried to answer, but the storm chewed her words to pieces. What came through instead wasn't her voice. It was laughter. Not loud, not sharp. Just a faint chuckle buried in the static, like someone standing in the room but refusing to show themselves. I froze. My radio hissed, spat, and then Lane cut in again, sharper now. You hear that? Tell me you heard that. Nobody answered. Not me, not dispatch. The channel was dead except for him. The clock slid past midnight. I kept checking the road behind me, the tree line, the rear-view mirror, like I expected to see someone standing there. But the night stayed empty except for the storm. Lane's voice came again. All right? I've pulled over. The signal's strongest here. God, it's static tore the rest apart. Then his voice returned, closer, like he was whispering into the mic. I think I see it now. The channel clicked. Silence. I waited, leaning forward so hard my chest nearly pressed into the wheel. 5 seconds. 10. 30. Nothing. Sheriff Lane, repeat transmission, I said. My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. What do you see? The radio popped, sputtered. Then came a low sound. So faint I thought at first it was just the rain bleeding into the channel. It wasn't. It was breathing. Slow, heavy, not his. I slammed the cruiser into drive and tore down the road toward Reservation. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. The storm swallowed the road whole, my headlights bouncing off nothing but sheets of water. Every few seconds I hit the mic again. Sheriff, do you copy? Sheriff Lane, answer. No reply. By the time I reached Reservation Road, my stomach was knotted so tight it hurt. Lane's cruiser was there. Parked half on the shoulder, driver's side door open, engine still running, rain hammered the roof and hood, but the driver's seat was empty. I stepped out, flashlight in one hand, radio in the other, yelling his name into the storm. My beam cut through the rain in fragments, barely reaching the ditch. The radio hissed in my palm. Don't! It was his voice, strangled, weak. Sheriff, I shouted. Where are you, static? Then another burst of words, warped and broken. Don't follow. And then something else slid onto the frequency, a sound that wasn't him. It was low, guttural, dragging across the channel like a growl stretched thin by metal. It rose and fell in a rhythm, almost like chanting. I dropped the mic. The flashlight shook in my hand as I leaned toward the ditch. For a split second, between flashes of lightning, I saw tracks in the mud, boot prints, fresh, leading away from the cruiser. I followed them without thinking, sloshing through the ditch, mud sucking at my boots. But after 10 steps, the prints just stopped, no turn, no stumble, no slide, just there, and then gone. I swung the beam across the desert scrub, breathing hard. Nothing but the rain beating the dust flat. Behind me, the cruiser's radio crackled one last time. Lane to dispatch. The signal cut with a squeal so sharp it made my teeth ache. When I sprinted back to the cruiser, the channel was empty. Dead. We searched for 3 days straight. Every deputy in the county, volunteers, even a few tribal officers from the reservation. We combed the road, the desert, the arroyos. Dogs, drones, everything we had. All we found was his flashlight lying in the mud 30 yards from his car. The lens was cracked. The bulb inside still warm, like it had been dropped just minutes before we arrived, but there was no sign of Lane. Afterward, the higher-ups told us not to talk about the details. Sheriff lost in the storm, they said. Got disoriented. Wandered too far to make it back. But none of us believed that. Not after what we'd heard over the radio. Not after the prints that stopped in the mud like he'd been lifted out of the world. Some deputies quit not long after. They said it wasn't worth it. Whatever was out there wasn't police work. It wasn't something you could cuff and drag into holding. Me, I stayed. But I keep a notebook now. Every storm, every burst of static, every voice that bleeds through. I write it down because I know the truth. No one wants to say out loud. Lane didn't just vanish. He was taken, and if the frequency opens again, whatever took him might come back for the rest of us. I still remember the smell, that mix of paper, dust, and stale coffee that clung to the evidence room no matter how many times the janitor mopped it. I'd been in and out of that room for years. Checking files, signing boxes in and out, sometimes just killing time when I didn't want to sit at my desk. Everything about it felt ordinary. Comforting even, until the morning I opened the door and realized something was wrong. It was early, just past 7. The hallways of the department were quiet. The kind of silence you only get before the phones start ringing and the radios light up. I had a mug of coffee in one hand and the keys in the other. The plan was simple: pull a case file, make some notes, and head back to my office. But the second I turned the key and pushed the heavy metal door open, my stomach dropped. The shelves were bare, row after row of metal racks, all of them empty. I froze in the doorway, coffee halfway to my lips. For a second, I thought maybe I was looking in the wrong room, that I'd somehow walked into the janitor's closet by mistake. But no. The fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the old security camera bolted into the corner. The heavy lock I'd just opened, this was the evidence room, and it had been cleaned out. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the boxes had been moved for an audit or transferred to another department, and no one had told me. But the longer I stood there, the harder that theory was to swallow, because I knew exactly what was supposed to be on those shelves: files, boxes of photographs, bags sealed with tape marked in black ink, items taken from patrol cars found abandoned, from houses no one lived in anymore, from the places deputies had vanished without a trace. All the scraps we had left of them, gone. I backed out of the room and called for Sergeant Walker. He came down the hall, rubbing his eyes like I'd dragged him out of bed. One look through the door and he sobered up quick. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. We both stepped inside. He kept walking down the rows, checking every shelf, like maybe the files had just slipped out of sight. But the room was stripped clean. Not a single box, not a single envelope. I checked the logbook on the desk. The last entry was from 3 nights before. My own handwriting, signing in a bag of evidence pulled from Deputy Reed's cruiser after he disappeared. That bag was gone now, too. Walker looked at me, his face pale in the sick light. "Who else has keys?" I swallowed hard. "Just me, you, and the sheriff." We stood there in silence, both of us thinking the same thing. Sheriff Lane had been gone for months. Vanished out on Reservation Road, his cruiser left running in the storm. That left only us. We pulled the security footage next. I was half expecting the feed to be blank, but it wasn't. The footage was there, hours of it stretching through the night, and yet it showed nothing. No one entering the hall, no one unlocking the door, not even a flicker of movement, all the way through until I arrived that morning. The camera had been rolling. The room had been locked, and somehow everything inside had still been taken. Word spread fast. The deputies whispered about it in the break room, leaning close over their coffee cups, voices low. Some of them joked about it, but I could see the unease in their faces. A few of the younger ones asked the question nobody else wanted to say out loud. What if it wasn't a person that took it? We all knew what they meant. The same thing we'd been hearing in the static, in the storms, in the empty calls that came through the radio at night, something we couldn't cuff or drag into court. That night, I stayed late, sitting in my office with the logbook open in front of me. I kept reading the entries over and over, as though the handwriting would change if I stared hard enough. Each line was a memory, deputy. Carter's badge, Reed's torn shirt, a dash cam, tape that played nothing but snow and whispers. All gone. I tried to imagine someone hauling all of it out, carrying box after box through the halls without being seen. It was impossible. The building was too small. Too many eyes, and yet the room was empty. Around midnight, I went back to check it again. The door opened on silence, the bare shelves waiting like they were mocking me. But this time, something else was there. On the desk, where the logbook sat, someone had left a single sheet of paper. I froze in the doorway. It wasn't there earlier. I was sure of it. My hands shook as I picked it up. Just a blank page, except for 3 words scrawled across the middle in black ink. We remember now. The handwriting wasn't mine. It wasn't Walker's. I dropped the paper back on the desk and stumbled out of the room, locking the door behind me even though there was nothing left inside. I didn't tell the others about the note. I couldn't. The whispers were bad enough already. But ever since that night, I can't shake the feeling that whatever took the evidence didn't just want to erase it. It wanted us to know, to feel the gap where those files should have been, to live with the weight of memory, heavy and useless, with nothing left to prove what we saw, what we lost. Some nights I wonder if that's worse than the disappearances themselves, the not knowing, the silence where answers should be. I still have the key to the evidence room. The shelves are still empty. The note still sits on the desk, right where I left it. And every time I unlock that door, I feel the same thing I felt that morning, that the room isn't really empty at all. It's waiting. I've been a clerk at the department for almost 12 years. Most days are simple. Paperwork, filing, sorting the endless stream of forms that pass through our hands. I don't wear a badge. I don't carry a gun, but I know the heartbeat of this place better than most. The officers come and go. The radios chatter. The phones never stop. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, I keep track of the little things everyone else forgets. That's how I found the list. It started with a cardboard box, old, beaten up, shoved to the back of the storage room like trash no one wanted to deal with. I was looking for a file, digging through piles of case reports that smelled like mildew and ink, when my hand brushed something tucked under the flaps, a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with age, the kind that feels softer than it should, worn thin from being touched too many times. I pulled it out, thinking it was just a misfiled report, but the second I opened it, I knew it wasn't. It was a list, handwritten, block letters, dark and sharp, pressed so hard into the page that the ink bled faintly through the back, and every line was a name, names I knew, names of officers who had gone missing. The first one hit me, hardest. Deputy Carter. I'd been the one to log his disappearance. I still remember the way his wife's voice cracked when she came into the office, begging for answers we didn't have, but there it was. His name, written in thick black ink, then Reed, then Martinez, then Sheriff Lane, all of them, one after another. In the exact order they vanished, except for one detail, the dates written beside the names. Every single one was years before they disappeared. At first I thought it was a mistake, a prank maybe, someone scribbling predictions after the fact, trying to spook whoever found it. But the handwriting was old. The ink faded in places. The page itself fragile, almost brittle at the folds. This wasn't recent. I checked the bottom of the sheet, hoping for some kind of signature, some clue about who had written it. But there was nothing. Just one more name, not crossed out, not dated, and it wasn't an officer I recognized. It was mine. I dropped the paper like it burned me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at it on the floor. The fluorescent light overhead hummed and flickered, and the sound of the building seemed to fade until all I could hear was my own breathing. I told myself it was a joke. That was the only answer that made sense. Someone wrote the names after the disappearances, slipped the paper into the box, and waited for someone gullible like me to find it. But deep down, I didn't believe it, because I know the archives. I know the files. I know the smell of old paper, the way ink ages, the feel of something that's been sitting untouched for years. This wasn't a forgery. I folded the list and shoved it into my pocket before anyone could see. The rest of the day blurred by. I sat at my desk, typing forms, answering phones, pretending to work while the paper weighed heavy against my leg. Every time an officer walked past me, I glanced up at their face, then back at the list in my mind. Some of their names weren't written yet. But what if they would be? What if they just hadn't been added, or hadn't disappeared yet? By the time the sun went down, I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped out of the building, drove home in silence, and locked myself in my apartment. Only then did I take the list back out. I spread it on the kitchen table and stared at my name at the bottom. No date. Just waiting. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing sounds in the apartment. Soft creaks, faint scratches, like someone moving in the next room. Every time I got up to check, there was nothing there. But when I sat back down, the list seemed to have shifted slightly, like it was never quite where I left it. By morning, I convinced myself it was exhaustion. Just nerves, nothing more. But I couldn't shake the thought that someone wanted me to find it. The next day, I tried to trace where the box had come from. I combed through the storage records, checked transfer logs, even asked Walker if he remembered anything about it. He just shrugged. Said boxes like that get dumped in all the time. Old files, old junk, things that should have been destroyed but weren't. But there was no record of this one. No entry, no receipt, nothing. It was like it had always been there, waiting. That afternoon, I made a mistake. I showed the list to one of the officers. Not the whole thing, just a corner. Just enough to prove I wasn't imagining it. His face went pale the second he saw it. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked away. An hour later, he handed me a transfer form. Effective immediately, I'd be moving my desk to the far wing of the building, away from dispatch, away from the squad room. No explanation, no discussion, just distance, like they didn't want me near them anymore. I keep the list hidden now, folded tight, tucked inside a folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. But I can't stop thinking about it, about the names already crossed out, about the ones not yet written, about mine at the bottom, waiting for its date. And sometimes when I'm alone in the office at night, I swear, I hear the sound of a pen scratching on paper, like someone is still adding to it. Line by line, name by name. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know how they knew, but I know this. The roster isn't finished, and one day soon, someone will write the date beside my name. When that happens, it won't matter that I never wore a badge. It won't matter that I never stepped into the field. Because whatever is out, there, whatever keeps taking them, already, knows who I am, and it's coming. I've worked in that building for over a decade. The air always carries the same faint smell. Stale coffee, gun oil, and the damp mildew from pipes that should have been replaced years ago. It's the kind of place you stop noticing after a while. The same linoleum floors, the same buzzing lights, the same row of lockers where the officers keep their gear. I always thought of those lockers as simple, ordinary things. Just metal boxes with squeaky hinges and chipped paint. I've seen them hundreds of times, stacked against the wall like silent soldiers. Never once did I imagine they could hold anything more until that night. It was after midnight. I'd stayed late trying to finish some reports before the morning rush. The building was almost empty. Just me. The hum of the vending machine down the hall and the occasional pop of the heater kicking in. When I walked past the locker room, something felt wrong. The door was cracked open, just enough to let a line of fluorescent light spill across the floor. Normally it's locked after hours, but that night it wasn't. I should have kept walking. But curiosity has a way of pulling at me, the same way it did when I found that list in the box. So I stepped inside. The room was colder than the rest of the building. My shoes echoed against the tiles, the sound bouncing back at me in a hollow rhythm. I scanned the rows of lockers, half expecting to see one of the deputies changing or grabbing something they forgot. But the place was empty. At least, it looked empty. Then I noticed it. Locker. 17. The door was ajar. Not wide open, just barely cracked. Like someone had opened it slowly, carefully, and then stopped. And from inside I heard it. Breathing. Heavy, ragged breaths. The kind you hear from someone who's been running hard. Low, uneven, almost wheezing. I froze where I stood. My first thought was that someone had passed out in there, maybe drunk or hurt. But the longer I listened, the less human it sounded. The rhythm was wrong. It wasn't the rise and fall of lungs I was used to hearing. It was slower, heavier, dragging out longer than a person could manage, and it was loud. Too loud for the small space behind that thin sheet of metal. It felt like the sound was filling the whole room, vibrating in the walls, crawling into my chest. I wanted to call out, ask who was in there. But something deep in my gut told me not to. Not yet. Instead, I stepped closer. My heartbeat drowned out almost everything, except for that awful breathing. The locker door shivered slightly, as if whatever was inside had shifted its weight. And then it stopped. The breathing cut off mid-inhale, like it realized I was there. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. I stood there, staring at the thin crack of shadow between the door and the frame, and felt the weight of something staring back at me. I don't know how long I waited, maybe 10 seconds, maybe a full minute. But when the door finally moved, I nearly stumbled backward. It creaked open another inch. Not pushed, not pulled, just opening. And still, nothing came out. I forced myself to reach for the handle. My hand shook so badly I had to grip it twice before I could pull. The door swung open. The locker was empty. Just a steel box, scratched and dented, smelling faintly of rust. No person, no equipment, nothing. But the air inside was hot, like someone had just been there. And the metal walls were damp with condensation. Beads of moisture sliding down as if the locker itself had been sweating. And in the corner, scratched deep into the paint, were marks. 4 long, curved gouges, dragging downward like claws. I slammed the door shut and stumbled back. My breath came fast, shaky, too loud in the small room. For a second, I thought I heard it again, breathing, low and steady, but now outside the locker. Not inside it. I spun around, expecting to see someone behind me. The room was still empty, but the smell hit me. Sweat, rot, and something sharp, like burnt metal. It hung in the air, thick enough to taste. I didn't last another second in that room. I ran out, down the hall, back to my desk where the papers sat waiting, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept circling back to the locker. To that heat, that smell, those scratches. I told myself I imagined it, that it was late, I was tired, and my brain was playing tricks on me. But when I came back the next morning, locker 17 was wide open again, and inside, more scratches. Fresh ones. I didn't report it. I couldn't. Who would believe me? A clerk hearing breathing in an empty locker? But I started watching. Every night, when the building grew quiet, the same door would ease open, just a crack, never all the way. And sometimes, when I stood very still, I'd hear it again. That slow, heavy breathing pressing against my ears, waiting for me to get close. Other nights, it was different. Once, I heard something dragging across the tiles inside the room. Once, I swear I saw a shadow move behind the row of lockers even though no one was there. And once I found another list, folded neatly inside the locker as if it had been left there for me. But this one was blank. Just lined paper. Empty. Waiting. I've tried to avoid that hallway now. Tried to bury myself in work, to pretend the lockers are just lockers, but I know better. Because sometimes, when I'm filing reports alone, I feel the breath against the back of my neck. Slow, heavy, the same rhythm I first heard inside locker 17. I turn every time, and every time no one is there. But the air is always hot, and I can't shake the feeling that one night, when that door swings open, the locker won't be empty anymore. They told me once that this building is just concrete and steel, just walls and doors, floors and ceilings. But after what I've seen, after what I've heard, I know better. Something else lives here, and for some reason, it's hiding in plain sight, waiting for the night when someone opens the locker and doesn't walk away. I never wanted to go back to the Pines, not after what I'd heard, not after what people said about the place. But that morning, the phone rang at the station, dragging me out of my coffee and my quiet, meaningless routine. The voice on the other end was shaky, almost trembling. A local farmer whose voice had the edge of panic. He said, "Sheriff, you gotta see this. It's the animals. It's not right." I didn't have to ask what he meant. Animal mutilations weren't exactly new to the Barrens, but something in his tone told me this wasn't just a coyote or a raccoon gone wild. By the time I got to his farm, the sun was barely a pale smear in the sky, like it didn't want to rise. I parked my cruiser at the edge of his property and stepped onto the frozen ground, the pine needles crunching under my boots. There was a smell in the air, sharp, metallic, and wet, that made my stomach churn. I followed it past the fence, past the rusting tractor, and there it was. A deer, gutted with surgical precision, nothing wasted, nothing random. The eyes were wide open, staring, and for a moment I thought I saw movement in them, like the forest itself was watching. The farmer, a lean man with hands that looked like they'd been working the soil his whole life, stood a few feet away, rocking on his heels. "Seen it before?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. He shook his head. "Not like this. Never like this." I knelt beside the animal, noting the cuts. Clean, deliberate. No teeth marks, no struggle signs almost. Ceremonial. My stomach twisted. I've seen my share of roadkill and predator kills, but this had a pattern, an order. It didn't belong in the natural world. The barrens stretched for miles, a tangled, suffocating maze of pines and low fog. The further you go, the heavier the silence becomes. It presses against your ears, your chest, like the air itself is trying to suffocate you. I drove deeper into it that afternoon, following another call from a neighbor who found her dog mutilated near the creek. The closer I got, the more the trees seemed to close in, black needles blotting out the light. I parked near the creek and got out, my breath puffing in tight clouds. The dog's body was there, paws stretched like it had been reaching for something before it died. I knelt again, checking for tracks, anything that could explain this. Nothing, only the mud, stamped with the shapes of hooves that weren't quite deer, or maybe something else. I rubbed my face with my hands, trying to shake the growing unease. That's when I noticed it. The smell again, stronger here, mingled with the iron of blood. I glanced up at the tree line. Shadows moved between the trunks, or maybe it was the fog playing tricks. I thought I saw a figure, tall and thin, watching me. I froze. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the trees. No answer. Only the wind rustling through branches, whispering in a language I couldn't understand, but felt deep in my bones. I spent hours tracing the creek, finding no more bodies, only signs. Marks on trees, claw-like scratches, and tracks that twisted in impossible ways. By the time the sun started to fall behind the pines, I realized I wasn't following a path. I was being drawn deeper into the forest, and part of me wanted to scream, to run back to the warmth of my cruiser. But my pride and curiosity anchored me there. The forest has a way of warping time. Minutes stretch into hours, hours into something uncountable. By the time darkness settled, I knew I had to set up at least a perimeter, mark the area, call it in. But the radio was dead. No signal. My phone barely clung to life, a single bar that flickered like a dying eye. I tried to remember what I'd been taught as a kid in these parts. Don't go alone. Never wander after sunset. But here I was, alone, chest tightening, shadows folding over me like blankets of black. I thought I heard footsteps then. Soft at first, brushing through needles and dead leaves. I froze again, heartbeat hammering. I called out. Nothing, just the wind. But the sound persisted, closer now. Something moving in a rhythm, deliberate, methodical. I couldn't see it, couldn't catch it, but it felt patient, waiting, watching. I thought about leaving, turning back the way I came, but my truck was gone, or at least it felt gone. The forest seemed larger now, impossible in scale, the creek bending around in ways it hadn't before. My skin crawled. I knew the stories. Every local kid grows up with them. Disappearances, strange lights, unexplainable noises. I never believed them. Not really. But now, with the night pressing against my face, the air smelling of iron and decay, I understood fear. The real, unshakable kind. I stumbled over roots and broken branches, chest heaving, trying to orient myself. And that's when I heard it. A low hum vibrating through the trees, a sound that didn't belong. Not animal, not human, just wrong. It made my teeth ache. My hands trembled. I wanted to run, but my legs felt cemented. I wanted to call for backup, but the radio and phone were dead. Something shifted behind me. Not moving exactly, but bending the shadows like a reed in the wind. I turned slowly. Nothing. But the feeling lingered, like the forest had a pulse, and it was watching me. I pressed my back against a pine, trying to steady myself. My training told me to remain calm, assess, record. My instincts told me to run. I saw another set of tracks then, larger than the first, too symmetrical, too precise to be natural. And in the mud nearby, a symbol scratched into the ground, a circle with lines, jagged, bleeding into the soil. I didn't recognize it, but it made my stomach flip. Whoever or whatever was here wasn't just hunting. They were marking, claiming, waiting for something. The wind picked up suddenly, sharp and cold, slicing through my jacket. I shivered, imagining eyes in every shadow. I had to get back to the truck, had to report, had to tell someone what I'd seen. But as I moved, I felt that same pull, a gentle tug at the back of my mind, guiding me deeper into the forest, toward the source. I wanted to fight it, resist, but my legs followed anyway. I found the clearing an hour later, or maybe it was minutes. Time no longer mattered here. The clearing was empty, save for another mutilated animal, positioned carefully in the center. And then I saw it, a figure at the edge of the trees. Tall, thin, wrapped in shadows, and staring at me was something that was almost human, almost not. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My heart thudded painfully, loud enough to echo in the clearing. I turned to run, but the forest had changed. Trees shifted, or I had shifted, I couldn't tell. The path I came from was gone, replaced by endless trunks and darkness. Panic clawed at me. I stumbled, fell, and when I looked up, the figure was closer. Not running, not chasing, just there, waiting. I scrambled to my feet, chest heaving, eyes darting, desperate for anything familiar. My phone, finally, flickered to life for a second, showing me the faint glow of the truck far in the distance. I ran, faster than I thought possible, branches slashing at my face and arms, knees bleeding, lungs burning. Every step felt like I was dragging through thick water, the forest resisting. When I finally reached the truck, I slammed the door and locked it, shaking so hard I could barely start the engine. The road out of the pines stretched endlessly, fog curling around the trees like fingers trying to pull me back. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't dare. By the time I hit the main road, lights of civilization piercing the fog, I realized my hands were trembling, my shirt soaked with sweat. I tried to speak to the farmer, to call anyone, to explain what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain something that doesn't fit in reality? Something that feels like a memory you never had? I know I should have left it there, reported it as another animal mutilation, maybe just a predator's cruelty, but I can't, because I felt it. The eyes in the shadows, the slow rhythm of those steps, the deliberate surgical marking of the bodies. And I know that it's still there, waiting in the pines, patient and unseen, watching for the next call to the forest. I keep waking up at night, thinking I hear that hum again, low and resonant, vibrating through the walls of my house. And every time, I remember the pull, the way the forest seemed alive, shaping itself to drag me in. I don't know how much time I'll have before it calls again, and I don't know if I want to answer. I never thought the Barrens could get any worse. I've spent enough nights patrolling those woods to know their moods, their silences. But that evening, after the mutilations, something had shifted. The deputies started calling in, describing things I didn't want to believe. Glowing shapes, shadows moving on their own, lights between trees that flickered like eyes. I got the call around sunset. Deputy Mills sounded shaken, and that man's voice doesn't break easily. He said, "Sheriff, I don't know what it is. Something's out there. Something's watching us." There was a pause. Lights, moving lights like they're alive. I drove out to meet him, the sky a bruise of purple and gray, fog beginning to curl among the pines. The barrens were quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest until you start imagining things. Mills met me at the edge of the patrol path, flashlight cutting through the mist, hands shaking. "They started around the old logging trail," he said. "First little lights, tiny, like fireflies, but wrong. They move against the wind, don't fade. And then the shadows. They don't belong," I frowned. I'd been in these woods long enough to see things move that shouldn't, animals acting strange, branches bending oddly. But lights, living shadows, that was a different kind of story. My stomach twisted. We walked in, headlights off, the truck's engine humming softly behind us. The trees were thick, black silhouettes against the dying light. The mist swirled around our boots, creeping like smoke from some unseen fire. Mills was whispering, pointing, eyes wide, but I saw nothing at first. Then a flicker, a soft glow hovering between two pines. My breath hitched. "Do you see it?" Mills whispered. I nodded slowly, not taking my eyes off the light. It wasn't a lantern, not any human-made light. It floated, pulsing, and moved in small, deliberate arcs like it was alive. My mind tried to rationalize it, bugs catching the last light, a reflection, but the pattern was too deliberate, too knowing. I stepped closer. The closer we got, the more lights appeared, dotting the forest like stars scattered too low to the ground. And the shadows, there they were, moving just beyond the reach of our flashlights. They weren't animals. Their movement was wrong, jerky but fluid at the same time, like someone or something was practicing a rhythm we weren't supposed to notice. Mills swallowed hard. I thought I was seeing things. Thought the fog, the dark, but they're real. They follow us." His voice trembled. I didn't answer. There's a point when you stop trying to comfort someone and start trying not to be consumed yourself. The forest seemed to contract around us. Every sound was amplified. The snap of a branch, the rustle of needles, the distant cry of an animal. And then a hum started. Low, vibrating, something in your chest. It wasn't coming from the lights. It was the forest itself. The hum grew louder, filling my head, and I felt my vision flicker in the corners. One light darted close, zigzagging between the trees, fast and purposeful. I froze. Mills froze. For a heartbeat, the forest itself held its breath. And then it vanished. Just like that, leaving only shadows, deeper and darker than the night. We kept moving, our pace slow, careful. Every time a light appeared, it felt like it was testing us, circling, dancing just beyond reach. I started seeing patterns in the shadows. Shapes that seemed humanoid, tall and thin, standing among the pines, then vanishing when I blinked. My mind told me it was exhaustion, nerves, paranoia, but my gut screamed otherwise. Something was out there, watching, learning. Mills kept talking, trying to distract himself, talking about hunting trips, old cases, anything. But I could see the terror creeping in his eyes. He saw what I saw. He felt it. The barrens had a pulse tonight, and it wasn't natural. We reached the clearing near the abandoned logging site. The lights gathered there, faint now, hovering over the earth like lanterns in a graveyard. Shadows writhed beneath them, moving in loops, impossible angles, not just cast by trees. I realized then that they weren't shadows at all. They were shapes, tangible, stretching and shrinking, slipping between the pines, but never fully revealing themselves. I wanted to take a step forward. I wanted to understand, but the hum pressed against my skull, rattling thoughts, memories, images I didn't want to see. I thought about the mutilated animals, the patterns, the markings. I thought about the pull I felt when I chased that figure through the pines. And I understood then, they were connected. Everything here, the lights, the shapes, the forest itself, was connected and it was aware. Sheriff, Mills's voice broke me from the thought. I looked at him pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. They're trying to get us to follow. I can feel it. They want us to walk into the middle. I nodded, understanding without words. That pull, the same I'd felt before, was here. Stronger, insistent. It wasn't an accident. They wanted someone to see, to chase, to become part of whatever game this forest was playing. We backed away slowly, eyes on the lights, hearts hammering. The forest shifted with us. Every tree seemed taller, every shadow thicker. The lights pulsed in rhythm with the hum, like they were breathing, waiting. And then, without warning, the largest of the lights shot straight up, piercing the fog, and disappeared into the canopy. The hum stopped. Silence returned. It was not peace. It was a pause. The forest was holding its breath, watching, waiting. We didn't speak for a long time, moving out of the clearing, back toward our trucks. I could feel the forest pressing in, every shadow twitching, every branch bending just enough to catch the corner of my eye. Mills whispered something about calling for backup, but I shook my head. This wasn't something you could call in, not in the usual way. You couldn't explain this without sounding insane. We finally reached the patrol path, the fog thinning slightly. The lights were gone, the shadows melted back into the darkness. But the hum stayed in my ears, vibrating faintly, a memory of the forest's pulse, a reminder that whatever we'd seen wasn't just out there, it had seen us too. Mills refused to go back. He wanted to quit, transfer, anything, but I knew we couldn't, not yet. The forest had opened a door, and it would keep calling until someone stepped through it. That night, I stayed in my cruiser, lights dim, engine off, listening to the quiet. And in that quiet, I thought I saw them, shapes moving just beyond the windshield, lights flickering in the distance, and the hum creeping back into my chest. I tried to sleep. But sleep doesn't come when the forest remembers your name. Sleep doesn't come when shadows watch. And I realized, with a cold certainty, that what we'd seen in the pines wasn't a hallucination or a trick of the light. It was alive, patient, waiting, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had already learned something about us. Because the Barons never forget, and neither will I. I wish I could say I wasn't afraid the day it happened. I can't. Because when Jenkins and Carter vanished in broad daylight, I realized the Barons didn't wait for the night to feed. It didn't need shadows or fog to hide its intentions. It only needed space. Space, and people who thought they could see it clearly. The call came mid-morning. The deputies had been searching the southern stretch near the old logging road. I was at the station, paperwork stacked like a fortress, and the radio crackled with Jenkins' voice. "Sheriff, we've got something," and then static. Sharp, high-pitched, slicing through the calm of the office like a knife. I grabbed the radio. "Jenkins? Carter, come in!" Nothing but the static screaming back. I tried the cell phones. Dead. Not even a bar. My stomach twisted. A warning I'd ignored too many times before. I drove out immediately, lights cutting through the mist still lingering from early morning. The Barrens were quiet the way they always were before you noticed something's wrong. The trees stood like sentinels, tall and silent. The wind rustled, soft, insistent, whispering promises I didn't want to hear. I found their tracks near the logging road. At first I thought maybe they'd just gone off path, but the prints were odd, too perfect. Footsteps spaced like they were following a pattern, weaving unnaturally around roots and stones. I frowned, leaning closer. The mud was fresh, but there were no marks where the deputies should have left them. Just the trail leading deeper into the trees. I followed anyway. My boots sank into the mud, wet pine needles sticking to my pant legs. The forest pressed in around me. Every branch, every shadow seemed alive. I tried to call their names, but my voice sounded small and foreign, swallowed by the air. And then I saw it. The first sign. Their radios, left behind near a broken branch, humming and writhing with static. But not the normal crackle I was used to. This was sharper, more deliberate, almost like voices trying to push through. I grabbed one and the static screamed into my ears, making me stagger back. I could swear I heard Carter whisper my name. Or maybe it was Jenkins. Or maybe it was the forest. I moved deeper. My hands shook around the radio, my heart hammering. The trees seemed taller here, darker. The light filtering through the canopy bent strangely. Shadows stretched and curled like liquid. I kept telling myself it was a trick of the morning sun, fog, exhaustion. But my gut knew better. Something was ahead. Something that didn't want us following, but wanted us to see. I found the first clue. Carter's flashlight lying in the mud, beams still faintly glowing, pointing toward a thick stand of pines. I knelt, looking closer. No footprints nearby, no sign of struggle. It was like he'd stepped into another layer of reality, one the rest of us couldn't enter. I called for them again. Nothing but static. And then I heard it. A faint echo of footsteps, not behind me, not ahead, but around me, circling, brushing through the trees. I spun. Nothing. Only the fog and the quiet hum of the forest, vibrating through the soles of my boots. Time stopped making sense. Minutes stretched like hours. The path I was following bent impossibly, leading in loops. I recognized nothing. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to shift around me, branches twisting, trunks moving just enough to disorient. And the hum grew louder, a low vibration through the earth, through my bones. Then I saw movement, a shadow slipping between two trees. Not fast, not chasing, just moving with intent. My chest tightened. I wanted to call out, to reach for it, but my voice stuck in my throat. I reached for the radio, and the static screamed again, the sound now almost forming words. My name, faint, echoed, followed by silence. I ran. My boots thudded against the wet earth, branches slashing my arms and face. Every step seemed to twist the forest further, until the path I thought I was following vanished. There was no trail, no signs, just the hum, the shadows, the movement I couldn't pin down, and then I saw them. Jenkins and Carter, or something wearing them. Standing perfectly still, barely discernible in the mist, their outlines tall and rigid, faces hidden. I froze. My stomach churned. They weren't breathing. Not the way humans do. Their eyes, or what I imagined as eyes, glowed faintly, reflecting the fog, watching. And then slowly, impossibly, they faded, like smoke curling into the trees. I stumbled, falling to my knees. My hands brushed the mud, trying to find evidence that they were really here, that they hadn't just been swallowed by my imagination. But the ground was empty, no footprints leading away, nothing disturbed. Only the radios buzzing softly, still trying to speak, still full of static. I pressed my forehead to the mud, trying to collect my thoughts. I remembered the first time I'd felt the pull in these woods, the way it reached inside you, tugging at memories, fears, instincts. This was stronger, sharper. It wasn't just the forest. It was whatever lived here. It wasn't hiding anymore. It was hunting, learning, shaping the forest to its will. I finally pulled myself up, dragging my feet through the thick underbrush. I tried the radio one last time, static, and then faintly, a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was their voices. Jenkins, Carter, pleading, laughing, screaming, and then nothing. I ran blindly, branches tearing at my jacket, mud sucking at my boots. My chest heaved, lungs burning. And when I broke through to the edge of the logging road, the world seemed normal again, almost too normal. The sun hung low, a muted orange, the road empty. The forest behind me was silent, innocent, waiting. The radios had stopped buzzing. The fog had thinned. But the emptiness, the absence of my deputies, screamed louder than any sound. I dropped to my knees, unable to comprehend, unable to plan, only able to feel the weight of the Baron's eyes on my back. Back at the station, I tried to call it in, to explain. But words failed me. How do you report two deputies vanishing without a trace, radios filled with impossible static, shadows that move with intention, a forest that bends? I could only write down the last known positions, the odd trails, the eerie silence that followed. And even that felt wrong, incomplete, like leaving pages missing from a diary I wasn't supposed to read. Sleep didn't come that night. I kept imagining their faces, frozen and pale, their eyes reflecting shapes I hadn't yet understood. Every sound outside my window made me tense. Branches scratching, wind humming, distant fog curling into the streetlights. I knew it was calling. It had tasted them, tested them, and now it would wait for me, patient, silent, knowing. The forest didn't care about daylight. It didn't care about law, order, or fear. It only cared about presence, attention, witnesses, and if you lingered too long, it reshaped reality around you until you became part of it, until you were gone in the way Jenkins and Carter were gone, erased, absorbed, leaving only whispers and static behind. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the wall, imagining footsteps circling, lights flickering between trees I could see from my bedroom window. And then I remembered the hum, the low vibrating hum that comes before you see them, the prelude to a disappearance. I felt it in my chest even here, miles from the barrens. The forest was patient, but it never forgot. I had to go back. I had to follow. I had to understand. Because if I didn't, the next call would be mine. And I knew, deep down, that the barrens had been waiting for me all along. I thought I had seen everything the barrens could throw at me. I was wrong. When the search team finally reached the clearing where Jenkins and Carter vanished, the forest had already erased most traces of them. Twisted roots, flattened leaves, a faint hum in the air. Everything ordinary had been swallowed by something that didn't belong. I remember standing there, staring at the ground, heart hammering, trying to force the world to make sense. Then I saw it. Their handcuffs, hanging from a low branch, blackened and warped, like metal left too close to fire. But no fire had touched them. The air around them smelled faintly of sulfur and iron. I swallowed hard, stepping closer, my boots crunching on the needles. The closer I got, the heavier the air became. The hum I'd felt before was back, low and insistent, vibrating in my chest like a pulse. I reached out. My fingers brushed the cold metal. It wasn't just twisted. It felt wrong, alive almost, writhing under my touch. I jerked my hand back. My skin crawled. I could swear the handcuffs shifted slightly, like they had just exhaled. I backed away, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't natural. The barrens didn't work like this. Not even the mutilations, not even the lights or the shadows. This was different. Intentional. Personal. Like the forest, or whatever lived in it, had left a message. A warning, or worse, a calling card. I pulled my flashlight from my belt and shone it across the clearing. Everything else seemed normal at first glance. The fog curled in lazy spirals around the trees, the trunks straight and solid. But the shadows, thin, reaching shadows, twisted along the ground, stretching toward the handcuffs as if bowing. My chest tightened. I wanted to run, but something held me there. Something that whispered in the corner of my mind, soft and persistent. I remember thinking about the radios, the voices, the impossible disappearance of my deputies. And then I realized this was the endgame. The forest had been shaping the story all along, testing, teaching, pulling us in. Jenkins and Carter were gone, and these handcuffs were the only proof that they'd ever been real. That they hadn't just been swallowed by the trees or lost in a hallucination. I called the station. My voice shook so badly I barely recognized it. Sheriff's office. I found static. My radio crackled violently, then went dead. No cell signal, nothing. The forest had cut the line. Of course it had. It wasn't just a place. It was aware, intelligent, and now I realized patient. I tried to take notes, to mark the tree, to do something to ground myself. But the longer I looked at the handcuffs, the more distorted the forest became. The trees shifted subtly, trunks bending just enough to block paths, branches twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist. Shadows pooled at the edges of my vision, writhing, shifting. I tried to blink it away, but it stayed. It always stayed. The wind picked up suddenly, cold and sharp, cutting through my jacket. I shivered, remembering the first night I'd felt the pull, the tug in my chest that drew me deeper into the forest. The same pull was here again, stronger, insistent. I felt my legs move before I decided. I was walking toward the edge of the clearing, toward deeper shadows, toward something I couldn't name. I don't know how long I walked. Minutes, hours, it didn't matter. The forest had its own rules. Branches bent to guide me. The mist thickened and thinned in patterns, almost like it was breathing. And then I saw it. Faint footprints. Jenkins, Carter, or the shapes they had become. They led away from the clearing deeper into impossibility. I followed, drawn by a mixture of duty, fear, and some unexplainable compulsion. The trail ended at another clearing, or maybe it was the same one seen from another angle. The mind doesn't process this forest the way it does the real world. Everything is wrong, angles are impossible, distances don't match memory. But there, in the center, was something new, something left behind. A carving in the mud, intricate and precise, symbols I didn't recognize. And the hum, oh God, the hum, filled my head, vibrating in my skull, in my chest, in my stomach. I fell to my knees, tried to memorize it, tried to rationalize it, tried to tell myself I wasn't losing my mind. But the symbols seemed to shift when I blinked, like they were alive, breathing, rearranging themselves. I wanted to scrape them into my notebook, mark them, prove they existed. But my hands wouldn't obey me. They shook too violently, and then I heard it, a whisper. Not through the radio this time, not carried on the wind, but inside my head. Faint, distorted, like two voices overlapping. Jenkins, Carter, or maybe the forest speaking in their voices. My knees hit the mud as the whisper grew louder, repeating a single word. My name. I scrambled backward, heart hammering, trying to escape, but the forest moved with me. Shadows twisted along the edges of my vision, growing longer, reaching, curling. The handcuffs gleamed in the weak light again. Blackened, twisted, impossibly wrong. I knew they weren't just a remnant. They were a lure, a message, a promise. And I was next. I stumbled over roots, tried to retrace my steps, tried to call for help. Nothing worked. Radio's dead. Phone's dead. Even my flashlight flickered and died. Absolute silence, broken only by the low, vibrating hum like the forest itself was exhaling, amused. And then I saw them again. Two shadows, tall and thin, moving between the trees. Not running, not chasing, watching, waiting. I froze. My mind screamed, my chest burned. The handcuffs seemed to shimmer from the corner of my vision, hanging impossibly from the branch, mocking me. And then the shadows advanced, slipping toward me like smoke, but solid enough to push air aside, enough to make the hairs on my arms rise. I wanted to run. My feet felt glued to the mud. My mind raced. Memories of Jenkins and Carter, their voices, the hum, the pull. I realized with cold certainty that this wasn't a place you ran from. You could only step deeper or vanish, and if you stepped deeper, you risked never coming back. I remember falling forward, hands hitting the mud, knees sinking into the cold, wet earth. I wanted to close my eyes, scream, plead. But the forest seemed to anticipate me, to know me, to read the panic in my chest and twist it into anticipation. I felt it watching, learning, shaping, and then silence. Absolute horrifying silence. The hum stopped. The shadows froze. The air went still. I dared to breathe. Slowly I looked up. The handcuffs were gone. The branch that held them now hung empty, blackened and scorched, as if burned by some unseen flame, and the forest waited. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move, too terrified to think. When I finally found the trail back, the forest seemed to release me just enough to stagger through. Every step was haunted by memory, by the whisper of voices in my head, by the sense that Jenkins and Carter were still out there, in some impossible state between reality and forest. Back at the station, I reported what I found. Handcuffs, symbols, impossible changes in the terrain. Everyone listened politely, nodded, and filed it away as weird, unexplained. But I knew better. I'd seen the forest take them, shape them, and leave only these signs. Only the handcuffs, twisted and blackened, remained as proof that something had been here. Something patient and intelligent. Something that didn't forget. I keep thinking about those handcuffs. How the metal seemed alive. How the forest shifted around them. How the whispers followed me even after I left. Sleep comes fitfully. Haunted by shapes between trees, shadows moving just beyond the edge of vision, by the low hum vibrating through my chest. I can't shake the feeling that they are still there, waiting for me to return, or for someone else to stumble in, because the barrens don't just consume. They mark, they teach, and when they leave something behind, it isn't a gift, it's a warning. I look at my own handcuffs now, resting in my office drawer, and I know they are different. Familiar, yet foreign. I haven't touched them, haven't opened them, but every time I pass I feel a tug, faint, insistent, calling me back to the forest, calling me to the branch where metal hung blackened and twisted, calling me to see what it wants next. I don't know if I'll ever go back. I don't know if I want to, but the Barrens doesn't care. It never waits for permission, and I know one day the forest will call again, and when it does, I'll hear the hum, I'll see the shadows, and I'll understand that nothing, not even fear, is enough to protect me, and whatever is left behind will claim me too. 3 months. 3 months of emptiness, of questions with no answers, of radio calls that returned nothing but static. I thought I had come to terms with it, that Deputy Lawson was gone, swallowed by the Barrens or whatever it was that haunted those woods. But when I saw him that morning, walking along the county road in his uniform, dazed and pale, I realized none of it had ended. I was the first to see him, headlights catching the reflective stripes of his jacket. He stumbled along the edge of the asphalt like a man waking from a deep, impossible sleep. My stomach dropped. He looked wrong. Skin washed of color, hair tangled, eyes unfocused but scanning the world as if trying to remember it. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering, and jumped out. "Lawson!" My voice cracked. He didn't respond, just kept walking, unsteady, toward the ditch. His boots scuffed the gravel, leaving shallow impressions, and every step seemed laborious, like he had forgotten how to use his legs. I grabbed his arm, cold as ice, damp as though he'd walked through a swamp for months. He blinked slowly, like a man surfacing from underwater. "Sheriff?" His voice was hoarse, strained, foreign in his own mouth. Where am I?" I shook him, fear pressing into my chest. "You're in Oak Ridge County. Do you remember what happened? Where you were?" He blinked again, but there was no recognition, only confusion and a flicker of terror. His eyes darted toward the tree line, wide, as if something might still be waiting there. The forest. It wouldn't... I couldn't... They... His words trailed off, swallowed by ragged breaths. I guided him to the cruiser, fumbling with the radio to call for backup, trying to get him to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Not in full sentences, only fragments. Shadows, lights, footsteps that weren't, not real. The drive back to the station was quiet, heavy. Lawson's hands gripped the seat, knuckles white. Every so often he'd glance out the window, eyes tracking the tree line like the forest had followed him all this way. I tried to calm him, tried to speak over the hum of the engine, but he barely heard me. I could feel the tension radiating from him. From the uniform that should have represented safety, authority, now a tattered relic of something the Barrens had stolen. When we reached the station, the medics were waiting. They took him quickly, murmuring reassurances I didn't believe. He walked unresisting, still pale and trembling, eyes flicking to shadows no one else could see. I followed, lingering at the door, watching as he vanished down the hall. That night, sleep didn't come. I drove the county roads, replaying the morning over and over. 3 months. Where had he been? And why return now? The Barrens had claimed him once, had hidden him away, and now he was back, but not entirely. Himself. Lawson was in the interrogation room the next morning, though it was more of a holding area than anything else. He sat stiffly, staring at the table, hands folded like a man trying to anchor himself to reality. I entered quietly, closing the door behind me. "Lawson," I said softly, "can you tell me what happened?" He flinched, as though my voice carried echoes of the forest itself. Then finally he spoke. Words fragmented, uneven, memories tangled with dreams, nightmares, and something else. Something he couldn't name. I remember the trees," he began. "The way they moved. Not like trees. Not just alive, watching. I thought I was lost forever. The shadows, they followed, always following. And the lights were waiting. I couldn't move right, not without them noticing. And then, I don't know. I just walked. I walked until I wasn't there anymore, and then I was back. I swallowed hard, trying to ground myself. The Barrens had taken him. Not killed, not yet, but something had changed him. Something had left a mark on his mind, a pattern that twisted reality and memory. Did you see anyone? Anything else? I pressed. He shook his head violently. No, no one. But I could hear them. Calling, whispering. Not voices, not real voices, but something trying to reach me, to pull me back. I walked, and I think I left pieces of myself behind. I wanted to ask more, to press him for details, but the fear in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't lying. He couldn't lie. What had taken him had rewritten his memory, and in the gaps, he had carried fragments of something else. I could feel it in the room, subtle and impossible, like the walls themselves were breathing, listening. Days passed. Lawson recovered physically, but the emptiness in his eyes remained. He spoke little, avoided the forest, avoided the edges of town, and yet, every morning, he woke with the same haunted look, tracing paths in the air as if trying to remember invisible trees. Lost lights, something unseen pressing in on him. I visited him once, in the quiet of his home, trying to coax details, trying to understand. He described walking along roads that didn't exist, through fog that bent light, past figures that were not quite human but moved like they were. I think they taught me, he said. But what? I don't know. I only remember fear and the lights. Always the lights. I tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, isolation, psychological trauma. But rationalization felt hollow, like a thin wall between me and something that could reach through. The Barrens don't obey logic. That much was clear. Every time I drove past the tree line, I imagined the shadows moving, always at the edges of perception. Every rustle, every flicker of light made my chest tighten. Lawson's return had reopened something long buried in the county, something waiting patiently for attention. The forest had claimed him, and in some unspoken way, it hadn't released him. I began patrolling the roads differently, keeping my eyes on the forest, listening, waiting. The hum of the trees, subtle and nearly imperceptible, seemed to echo in my mind. Lawson's steps along the road that morning haunted me, the slow shuffle of someone caught between worlds, between what was real and what the Barrens had rewritten. At night, I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, imagining him walking again along empty roads, following lights only he could see. I would hear whispers, faint, layered, almost beneath the wind outside. Sometimes I swore I could hear his voice calling, not for help, but warning, because he had returned. And yet he hadn't. Something stayed behind in the forest, something in the shadows, something in the hum of the trees, waiting for the next person to wander too close. I feel it now. Every time I drive past the edge of the Barrens, every time I see the fog curling between the trunks. It's patient, it's learning, and I know deep down that no one truly escapes. Lawson walks among us, alive, clothed in uniform, a figure of what we think we know. But behind those eyes, in that dazed expression, lies a memory we cannot reach, a memory rewritten by the forest. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I hear the whisper of the road beneath his boots, and I wonder how long until it calls for me, too, because the Barrens never forgets, and when it remembers, it waits. Lawson came home that evening like a man who had wandered too far and didn't remember the way back. 3 months missing, and yet here he was, uniform dusty, boots scuffed, eyes hollow and distant. At first we celebrated, relief, gratitude. But the relief didn't last. It started with the little things. He forgot names. Friends, neighbors, co-workers. He'd meet them, smile politely, and then falter, struggling to remember who they were. I watched it happen at the station first. Captain Harding called him over for a briefing. Lawson stood stiffly, saluting, eyes scanning the room as if seeing it for the first time. He nodded to people he knew well, hesitated at others, and then quietly muttered something incoherent under his breath. I caught it. Not here. Not here. I wanted to ask, to pry, but something in his posture warned me against it. There was a shadow inside him, one that had followed him out of the Barrens and refused to leave. At home, it got worse. Family dinners became silent affairs. He would sit at the table, staring at the food, not eating, not talking. When spoken to, he'd answer in fragments. Mother. Yeah, table. Something else. His voice was hollow, like he was repeating words he had memorized rather than understood. My gut tightened every time I saw it. He wasn't just confused, he was fragmented, like a book whose pages had been shuffled and half of them erased. Mirrors became unbearable for him. I watched him avoid them, walking past bathroom doors, turning quickly if he caught a glimpse of his reflection. Once his mother mentioned it softly over the phone. He won't look at himself. Not for more than a second. Then he looks away. I don't understand it. I didn't either. Not fully, but I felt it. The terror in him was still alive, hidden behind empty eyes, and looking at his own reflection reminded him of something he didn't want to see or couldn't recognize. Even at work, things weren't right. Lawson arrived on his first shift after returning, but his actions were off. Simple routines, the way he logged reports, handled evidence, walked the hallways, were just wrong, awkward, hesitant, as though he had forgotten the steps. Deputies whispered about it, glancing nervously, using words like off, not right, strange. I watched from my office, heart heavy. He was present and yet absent. Something had walked out of the barrens with him, and I could feel it in the room, subtle but undeniable. He would stare. Long, lingering, unblinking stares at nothing in particular. Sometimes at a wall, sometimes at the ceiling, sometimes just into the corner of the room. People tried to joke, tried to break the silence, but the looks were too intense, too probing, too patient. One moment he seemed almost human. The next, something alien flickered behind his eyes. Like the barrens had left an imprint on him, something waiting beneath the surface, watching, listening. I followed him once during a late-night patrol, curious, worried. He drove quietly, hands gripping the wheel, eyes flicking to the edges of the tree line repeatedly. "Do you see them?" I asked softly, trying to catch his attention. He didn't answer, not with words, just a slow shake of the head and a whisper. They never left. Not really. At the station, I overheard coworkers talking quietly. "He's not himself," they said. "Something's in there." "Not Lawson." The words stuck in my chest, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to defend him, to say it was just trauma, just shock, but deep down, I knew better. Trauma doesn't make you avoid mirrors. Trauma doesn't make you flinch at your own reflection. Trauma doesn't whisper warnings to you that no one else can hear. Family reports were worse. Lawson's sister called one evening, voice trembling. He looks at me and smiles. But it's not him. I don't know how to explain it. He seems to remember what he should, but not what he actually knows. He touches things, moves them, then forgets why. And sometimes he's gone for hours. Just gone. I'll find him staring at the woods behind the house, whispering, mumbling about lights, shadows, something watching. I tried to console her. Tried to remind myself that people cope differently, that 3 months missing would leave cracks in anyone. But it wasn't normal. Not for him. Not the way he moved, the way he stared. Not the way he seemed to carry the weight of unseen eyes pressing on him constantly. At night, Lawson would pace. Slow. Careful. Like he was measuring distances, counting shadows, cataloging shapes in the dark. He avoided the bathroom, avoided reflective surfaces, avoided direct eye contact with anyone. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and hear soft murmurs drifting down the hall. I never understood the words. Only fragments. They wait. Not ready. Can't see. Don't touch. His voice was always low, tremulous, like he was speaking to someone who wasn't there, or something. Once I confronted him quietly. I asked softly, gently, "Lawson, are you okay? Can you tell me what happened out there?" He looked at me then, fully, eyes wide and unblinking, and whispered, "Not everything wants to be found. Not everything comes back the same." That was it. That was all he would say. And in that moment I understood. The Barons hadn't returned him fully. They'd left him behind and taken something in exchange. Something I could feel every time he sat in a room. Every time he moved through the halls of the station. Every time he stared too long, avoided mirrors, forgot what he should remember. I began to notice other things. Small, unsettling habits that no one commented on. He would sometimes trace patterns in the dust on his desk, Symbols that didn't make sense, repeating them, whispering under his breath. Lights seemed to flicker around him, not with electricity, but with the kind of unnatural pulse that reminded me of the stories I'd heard about the barons. I thought I was imagining it. I wanted to be imagining it, but every time I looked, it was there. The deputies grew nervous. They whispered behind closed doors. Some refused to patrol with him. Others said he sometimes froze mid-step, staring at empty corridors as though he could see the forest itself creeping between walls. I caught glimpses of it too. Shadows, subtle and wrong, bending at angles they shouldn't, moving just beyond the edge of perception. Lawson noticed them first, always first. His eating habits changed. He barely touched food, and when he did, it was mechanical, precise, like someone else was controlling his hands. His speech became more stilted, repeating phrases that didn't match the conversation, often reciting things in monotone as though reading from a script he couldn't understand. I found myself watching him constantly, tracking the way he moved, the way he reacted. The fear in him was tangible, and the forest. The barons, whatever had marked him, was never far from his thoughts. He would sometimes whisper warnings in his sleep. I could never make out the words, only fragments. Coming, waiting, don't follow. One evening, I asked him to look in a mirror, just for a second. He froze, lips trembling, eyes widening as if the reflection was something alive, something waiting. He turned quickly, retreating, whispers following him down the hall. Don't see it! Don't let it see. Not yet. And I realized then fully that he wasn't himself. Not fully. Lawson was walking, breathing, speaking. But there was a fracture in him, an absence that the barons had left behind. Something had stayed in the forest. Something that had followed him back in subtle ways. Something that shaped his perception, his movements, his very mind. I tried to help him, tried to draw him out, tried to anchor him in reality, tried to remind him of who he was, of who we were. But it was impossible. The pieces of him that had returned were tethered to the barons in ways I could neither understand nor reach. And every day the fissure grew. Every day the things he didn't remember became more numerous, and the things he shouldn't know began to surface. I remember watching him once in the break room, staring at the wall, fingers tracing patterns invisible to anyone else. Someone asked him a question, simple, mundane. He responded correctly, mechanically. But then, almost imperceptibly, his eyes flicked to the corner, to the shadows, and he whispered, "They're watching. They always watch." And in that whisper, I understood the truth. Lawson had returned, yes, but the barons had left a mark, a lingering presence, a reminder that some things once lost are never truly reclaimed. He isn't himself, not anymore, not fully, and every day the world notices it a little less. His family, his co-workers, everyone too polite, too uncomfortable to speak. But I notice. I see the pauses, the long stares, the whispered warnings. I hear the tremor in his voice when he speaks, the mechanical precision of his movements, the way he avoids mirrors. And I know one thing with certainty, whatever came back with him, whatever followed him out of those trees is still here, patient, watching, waiting. I should have stopped him. I should have told him, warned him, not to go back on patrol. But Lawson insisted. He said he had to prove he could do it, that he could be himself again. I watched him climb into the cruiser that morning, uniform neat, hands gripping the wheel as though the barons themselves were waiting for him to falter. My gut tightened. Something about him wasn't right. Never right. The first hour was quiet. I followed at a distance, just far enough to monitor, close enough to intervene. He drove along the county roads, passing the edges of the forest without glancing in their direction. But I knew better. I could feel it. The subtle shift in the air, the pull in the spaces between the trees. The forest was alive, waiting, patient. And Lawson, he didn't know it. Or maybe he did. He made the first turn down Pine Ridge Road, the one that cut closest to the old Baron's trail. I slowed behind him, heart pounding. Every mile stretched, every curve seemed longer than it should, as though time itself had bent around that road. And then he stopped, engine idling, hands still on the wheel, eyes fixed on the forest, staring, not blinking. I rolled my window down, calling to him. Lawson, you okay?" He didn't respond. Not at first. Then a slow, deliberate shake of the head, almost imperceptible. Whispered words, barely audible over the engine. "They're waiting. Watching. Always." My skin crawled. I wanted to reach him, open the door, pull him out, but something rooted me in place. The air thickened. A low hum vibrated in my chest, barely perceptible but unmistakable. The same sound he had mentioned before, the one that followed him in nightmares, the one that haunted the barrens. I watched him drive again, slowly, deliberately, closer to the tree line. Every shadow seemed longer, stretching unnaturally across the road. The hum grew louder, almost imperceptibly, until my teeth ached with the vibration. My hands tightened on the wheel. This wasn't just nerves. Something out there. Something in those trees was calling him. Pulling him, he vanished before I could intervene. 1 second, headlights cutting the fog. The next, nothing. I slammed my brakes, skidding across gravel, heart hammering, vision narrowing. No sign of the cruiser ahead. No trace of him. Just silence, stretching across the road like a living thing. I ran forward, boots crunching gravel, calling his name. The road seemed endless. Shadows pooled at the edges, stretching, twisting, moving with intent. I could feel it in my chest. A presence, patient, waiting. Then I noticed the lights of the cruiser up ahead, still on, engine humming, doors locked tight. The metal gleamed faintly in the morning light. Pristine. And yet, it was wrong. Too perfect. Untouched. I circled the vehicle, pounding on doors, windows, calling his name. Nothing. The locks didn't budge. The doors didn't open. I pulled at them, yanking with all my strength. The handles didn't move. Inside, Lawson sat perfectly still, hands on the wheel, eyes forward, unblinking. I tried the passenger door. Locked. Rear doors, locked. I hammered on the roof. Screamed. Nothing. It didn't make sense. Not rationally. Not physically. The keys were on the seat. No sign of forced entry. No footprints outside. Nothing to explain how he had gotten in, let alone vanished. I stepped back, heart racing, mind struggling to form coherent thought. And then, I saw it. Or I think I did. A flicker, barely perceptible, in the rearview mirror. Shadows moving inside, bending around his body, pooling in the corners, shifting, reaching. I dropped to my knees, pressed my forehead to the roof of the cruiser, whispering his name. The air pressed down, heavy, unnatural, smelling faintly of damp pine and something metallic. The hum in my chest grew, resonating in time with the shadows, vibrating through my teeth, my bones, my skull. And then he was gone. The cruiser sat empty. Doors still locked. Engine idling. Headlights on. Not a mark inside or out. No evidence of him ever being there. And yet I knew. I knew he had been. I called for backup, frantic, shaking. Deputies arrived, police tape went up, cameras rolled. Everyone asked questions. Everyone speculated. Mechanical failure, distraction, human error. Nothing fit. Not the locked doors, not the empty interior, not the palpable sense that something had watched us all, waiting for the right moment. We inspected the area. The forest stretched out on either side of the road, silent, patient, unbroken. No footprints, no tire tracks beyond where he had been. Only shadows bending unnaturally at the edge of vision, pooling like liquid, reaching, retreating, always just out of reach. I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him, about those locked doors, about the hum, about the way the barrens seemed to stretch into the asphalt, into reality itself, and take him without leaving a trace. Days passed. The cruiser remained untouched. I stayed close, patrolling the edges of the road, hoping to see him return, hoping to catch a glimpse of movement in the fog. But he never came back. Not in person. Not in any trace that made sense. Only that unshakable feeling of presence, of watching, of something patient and intelligent lingering just beyond perception. I kept replaying that morning over and over. The way he had climbed in. The way the hum had started low, almost imperceptible. How the forest seemed to press against us both. How the shadows had danced along the edges of my vision, curling and stretching, knowing, waiting. And then the impossible moment. Him gone. the doors locked from the inside. I began to understand the truth. The Barons didn't just take. It didn't just trap or confuse. It claimed, it erased. It bent reality to its will. And Lawson? He wasn't the first, and I feared he wouldn't be the last. I checked the cruiser daily. Every bolt, every door, every lock, everything was normal. Too normal. And yet, I felt the weight of absence every time I approached. The air seemed thicker, the shadows longer, the hum in the distance, faint and vibrating like a heartbeat in the ground itself. Deputies whispered again, voices low, tense. Not natural, impossible. The forest, it's still there. I didn't correct them. They couldn't understand, not truly. They couldn't feel the pull, the presence, the patient intelligence that waited for someone to step too far, to look too closely, to drive down the wrong road at the wrong time. I drive past that stretch now, careful, always alert. I see the trees bending slightly in the wind, shadows pooling where they shouldn't. I feel the hum in my chest when I slow down near the road. And I know deep down that it's still waiting, watching, waiting for someone else to step too far into the Baron's reach. The cruiser remains. Doors locked, engine idling, headlights on, a monument to the impossible, to absence, to the patience of something beyond understanding, something intelligent, something that claims and erases without mercy. And I know that if you go looking for it, if you drive down that road, if you enter the forest's edge, if you follow the shadows, it will find you too. It will wait patient, patient, always patient. And when it decides, you will vanish, just like Lawson. The Barons never forgets, and it never releases.